Hey guys, tonight we slip into the golden lamplight of ancient Alexandria, where marble floors glow under torchlight and the air smells faintly of lotus and burning cedar. You're standing in a palace so huge it echoes like a cathedral, and somewhere in these endless corridors, a little girl named Cleopatra is learning how to survive a family that treats betrayal like a morning workout. You may think your family argues over dinner plans here, siblings argued over kingdoms, and honestly, if you tried to grow up in this palace yourself, you probably wouldn't survive this particular round of musical thrones. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, tell me where you're watching from tonight and what time it is over there. I love seeing this weird little community glow across the map. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You step forward across cool, polished stone as Cleopatra's childhood unfolds around you, one soft footfall at a time. Born in 69 BCE, she arrives in a world already smouldering with tension. The grand Ptolemaic dynasty, reduced to a soap opera that would make even a modern streaming service ask them to tone it down. Your gentle walkway echoes faintly as you imagine the palace walls themselves whispering with rumors who's plotting, who's scheming, who's poisoning who before brunch. The mainstream fact here is simple enough. By the time Cleopatra was born, Ptolemaic Egypt had ruled for nearly 3 centuries, descended from one of Alexander the Great's generals. But the quirky tidbit, little Cleopatra almost certainly spoke more languages than most modern diplomats before she hit puberty 9, according to some sources. As you move deeper into the scene, historians still argue whether she learned them out of pure genius or sheer survival instinct. When everyone around you is plotting, it's probably smart to understand what they're whispering. And with Cleopatra's family, there was always something to overhear. Her father, Ptolemy XII Auletes, nicknamed the flute player because he loved music far more than ruling, barely held the throne together. Even the Alexandrian elite mocked him, which, to be fair, they did to everyone, but they saved their best material for him. You drift through a hallway open to the night air, and warm desert wind brushes your cheek as faint sounds of the royal court rise from below like tangled threads. Servants move with trays of figs and honeyed pastries while advisors huddle in small knots, whispering about taxes, rebellions, or which cousin married which sibling this week. Ptolemaic family trees always looked like someone kept redrawing them in permanent marker while dizzy. This dynasty loved marrying siblings not for romance, but to keep power sealed tighter than a pharaoh's tomb. Cleopatra, as a child, watches it all with wide, calculating eyes. You feel her presence beside you, small, observant, already understanding that affection is rare but ambition is everywhere. Her siblings, Arsinoe, Ptolemy XIII, and Ptolemy XIII, grow up in the same palace, but experience a different emotional climate. While she buries herself in studies, maps, languages, and philosophy, they lean toward court alliances and political grooming. One early fact that follows Cleopatra forever: she is the first of her family in centuries to actually learn Egyptian. That alone makes her stand out like neon in a candlelit hall. A memory takes shape. Cleopatra standing on a balcony overlooking Alexandria's harbour, the lighthouse of Pharos burning bright on its rocky island. You hear the gulls, the endless splash of waves against the breakwaters, and the distant rumble of traders calling out in dozens of languages. This was the world's crossroads, a real-life superhighway of goods, ideas, and occasionally, drama. Even as a child, Cleopatra absorbs it like sunlight. A light joke stirs through your thoughts as you imagine Cleopatra greeting each day with, "Which sibling is trying to dethrone me today?" The ancient version of checking your notifications. And another joke tiptoes in. You picture Cleopatra practicing her queen voice in the mirror, trying to perfect a tone that says, "Both I love my people and touch my throne, and I'll unleash 1,000 warships." As you glide past columns painted with blue lapis and gold, you catch a softer moment, a rare glimpse of Cleopatra's private tutoring sessions. Her teachers are some of the sharpest minds in the Mediterranean, shaping her into someone who will someday keep pace with Julius Caesar and Mark Antony while still making them feel slightly outmatched. She studies rhetoric until words become weapons. She studies politics until alliances feel like mathematical equations. She studies philosophy until she can recite entire passages from memory. Historians still debate whether Cleopatra's early brilliance was a product of pure talent or the pressure of growing up knowing that at any point her entire world could be overturned by a single angry council meeting. But whichever answer you lean toward, the truth stays constant. She grows sharper every year, while the people around her grow more nervous. Even as you drift through the palace's moonlit chambers, you sense the weight of destiny hovering around the young girl with the intense eyes. The quiet footsteps behind you, the soft flicker of torches, the rustle of linen robes, they blend into the slow, a steady heartbeat of an empire that doesn't yet realize its most captivating queen is already preparing her first moves. Soon, the knives in the shadows will turn toward Cleopatra, and childhood will become a battlefield. But for now, you exhale, letting the warm Egyptian night settle around your shoulders, knowing this is where her long, dangerous journey truly begins. You continue walking along the palace colonnade, the night breeze brushing your face like a cool ribbon, and as you follow Cleopatra's path into adolescence, you start to understand something crucial. She isn't just another royal kid waiting to be placed on a throne like a decorative statue. She's a hybrid, born Greek by blood, raised Egyptian by destiny, and you feel that blend shaping her every step. The mainstream historical fact is simple. Cleopatra was a Ptolemy, part of a Macedonian Greek dynasty that had ruled Egypt ever since Alexander's generals carved up the world like a prize feast. But here's the fringe tidbit scholars still whisper about in footnotes. Some believe Cleopatra's mother may not have been pure Macedonian, possibly a noble Egyptian woman, maybe even from a priestly lineage, adding fuel to her unusually deep cultural fluency. Historians still argue whether this theory holds water, but you can feel how it would explain the ease with which she moves between worlds. You follow her into a courtyard, where the moonlight pools like spilled milk across the flagstones. She's a teenager now, still quiet, still observant, but her confidence blooms like the lotus flowers floating in the nearby pool. She slips between Greek and Egyptian languages as naturally as you might switch apps. You watch her greet scholars in one breath, then priests of Isis in the next, every sentence weaving her identity deeper into Egypt's spiritual fabric. A gentle joke flickers into your thoughts. Cleopatra would have crushed modern group projects. She always understood the assignment, and probably rewrote the rubric just to make it more efficient. Another joke arrives as you picture her tutors sighing every time she asks questions that spiral into 5-hour philosophy debates. And one more joke slips in as you imagine Cleopatra practicing her Egyptian introductions and thinking, if I'm going to be queen here, I should at least sound like it. A procession passes through the hall, priests carrying incense burners, scribes trailing behind with scrolls covered in careful hieroglyphs, and a musician plucking a small harp that trickles notes into the warm night. Cleopatra watches them closely. You feel her fascination with Egypt's oldest traditions, its gods, temples, rituals, even its humor. This is not the detached admiration of a foreign ruler. This is someone choosing to belong. She grows particularly attached to the goddess Isis, the divine mother, protector of kings, and patron of magic and healing. Cleopatra will later style herself as Isis reborn, but here, in these early years, you see the genuine awe in her face as she attends ceremonies. She learns how the high priests interpret omens, how the Nile's flooding patterns determine harvests, how the pharaoh is expected to serve as a bridge between the mortal and the divine. Meanwhile, Alexandria swirls with energy. You stroll beside Cleopatra through bustling marketplaces, where Greek philosophers debate loudly about geometry, while Egyptian merchants haggle over spices and dyed linen. You hear Roman traders bragging about their growing influence, unaware that Cleopatra will one day take 2 of Rome's greatest men and bend them into the shape of her ambitions. You smell roasting bread, sweet figs, salty breezes from the harbor, and just a hint of camel all in the same breath. But beneath this vibrant mosaic is unrest. You sense the tension in the noble houses, the irritation in the merchants' voices, the silent panic among the ruling elite. Egypt is rich, but its rulers keep relying on Rome for loans and protection. Cleopatra sees it all. The declining treasury, the fraying alliances, the public's frustration with her father's mismanagement. It's like watching a sandcastle slowly sink under rising waves. And here comes the subtle reality check. You're walking through a world that expects rulers to be figureheads, but Cleopatra is quietly assembling the tools for something bigger. She's learning diplomacy, finances, military movements, religious symbolism, all the gears of power. You feel her taking mental notes even during festivals. If someone compares 2 provinces' harvests, she files it away. If a Roman visitor mentions political unrest back home, she memorizes every detail. Her father's instability shapes her too. You watch him pace nervously, terrified of losing his throne again. He had once been exiled, forced to seek Rome's help to regain his crown, and Cleopatra absorbs every scrap of that memory. She sees what dependence looks like. She sees what humiliation tastes like, and she quietly vows to do better. As you walk through the palace's library wing, passing shelves that shine with polished scroll casings, Cleopatra steps beside you with the calm focus of someone used to absorbing oceans of knowledge. She studies medicine, astronomy, navigation, and mathematics fields many rulers would consider unnecessary. But you sense her strategy. Understanding the world makes it much easier to rule. Historians still debate whether Cleopatra planned from childhood to be a revolutionary ruler, or whether she simply grew into the role as chaos tightened around her. But watching her here moving like a quiet storm through Alexandria's blend of cultures, you feel the momentum building. The city itself changes as she grows older. Roman envoys appear more frequently, their political shadow stretching longer across Egypt. Cleopatra learns how to charm them without giving away too much. She listens, observes, adapts. She becomes a master of reading faces, an emotional cartographer long before she becomes a queen. This entire world is a stage, and Cleopatra is slowly stepping into the spotlight, not with arrogance, but with precision. She knows Egypt needs a ruler who understands both its heart and its politics. Someone who can speak to priests, generals, farmers, and foreign diplomats without losing authority. And as you follow her through another moonlit hallway, with braziers casting soft shadows that dance like silent conspirators, you realize something. Cleopatra may be young, but she already knows who she is, and more importantly, who she intends to become. Soon, the palace will turn into a battlefield of heirs, advisors, and opportunists. But for now, you exhale, letting the serenity of Alexandria's night settle around you as Cleopatra's dual identity, Greek blood, Egyptian soul, solidifies into the armor she will carry into the storms ahead. You drift through the palace's inner courtyard, just as dawn begins to sand the edges of the sky with soft gold, and you can feel the atmosphere tightening. The gentle glow doesn't calm anyone here. It only sharpens shadows that already hide too many secrets. Cleopatra is older now, no longer a child collecting languages like shiny beads, but a young woman stepping into a world where every smile might be a trap and every sibling might be sharpening a knife figuratively. Though with this family, you never fully rule out the literal option. The mainstream fact hits you first. When Cleopatra's father died in 51 BCE, she and her younger brother Ptolemy XIII were declared joint rulers. But the quirky tidbit is even more startling. Ptolemaic joint rule usually meant constant plotting disguised as polite meetings. Historians still argue whether their dynasty invented political dysfunction or just perfected it. You walk with Cleopatra into the Great Hall, where pillars rise like stone forests and sunlight pools on the floor in 1,000 broken squares. The royal council waits, stern faces, ink-stained fingers, robes that rustle like anxious birds whenever Cleopatra enters. She carries herself with calm certainty, but you feel the tension buzzing behind her like static. She's barely 18, sharing a throne with a brother who's around 10, and surrounded by advisors who think they should be the ones steering Egypt. They underestimate her, of course. People often do before she begins speaking. A light joke stirs as you imagine Cleopatra walking into these meetings, mentally preparing her "I will not throw this councilman off the balcony today" mantra. Another joke rises as you picture Ptolemy XIII's advisors trying to coach the boy into looking intimidating. "Okay, sweetie, try frowning like this. No, not like you ate a sour grape, like you're in charge of an empire." And one more joke drifts in as you think about how Cleopatra must have felt being technically married to her kid brother, the royal equivalent of being forced into a group project with someone still learning fractions. Yet beneath the humor, the stakes are razor sharp. You sense Cleopatra's growing isolation. Her father is gone. Rome's influence is weighing heavily on Egypt. And the court, always hungry for control, begins to rally behind young Ptolemy XIII, not because they love him, but because they can mold him like soft clay. Cleopatra, with her intelligence and independence, is far harder to manipulate. You follow her through the garden terrace, where palm fronds sigh in the morning breeze. She stands at the edge of a reflecting pool, watching ripples distort her face. You feel her contemplating how quickly a throne can become unstable. Advisors begin restricting her presence in meetings. Ptolemy XIII's inner circle spreads rumors claiming Cleopatra wants to rule alone, and perhaps the darkest truth. They may be right. She sees the chaos around her, and knows Egypt needs one decisive voice, hers. Historians still debate whether Cleopatra moved first, or if the council intended to push her aside from the moment her father died. What you do know is that political lines harden fast. Soon, documents start appearing with only Ptolemy XIII's name. Coins begin depicting him alone. Cleopatra's face, once on every decree, slowly fades from official life. Walking beside her, you feel her frustration simmering like a kettle just about to whistle. She tries to negotiate, tries to restore equality, but every word she speaks seems to tighten her brother's grip. Behind the palace walls, the boy king's advisors, chief among them the ruthless eunuch Pothinus, whisper poison into his ear. Cleopatra seeks your throne, they likely say. She wants power that belongs to you. You can almost hear their voices mingling with the rustling palm leaves. A hush falls over the palace as conflict brews. Servants exchange nervous glances. Guards reposition themselves. Scribes whisper about missing documents and shifting allegiances. You feel the palace tilting, slowly, inevitably, toward open confrontation. Cleopatra knows she's being edged out, and in one chilling moment, as you accompany her along a balcony overlooking the harbour, you hear Roman ships creaking in the distance. Rome always watches, always waits. And Cleopatra, sharp as any blade forged on the Nile, knows that losing internal power would leave Egypt vulnerable to Roman control. So she acts. In the dead of night, Cleopatra gathers loyal supporters. She slips out of Alexandria, her departure quiet enough that even the palace cats don't stir. You travel with her along desert roads where the wind sculpts dunes into enormous sleeping beasts, and the stars stretch overhead like glitter scattered by careless gods. She moves east toward Pelusium, a key border city, building alliances with provincial leaders as she goes. Her exile has begun forced, sudden, but strategically rich. Here comes your gentle reality check. Being exiled into the Egyptian desert is not a casual stroll. Even with guards and supplies, the heat is a fist, the sand is a knife, and the night cold feels like diving into ice water. You sense Cleopatra's resolve harden with every step. She refuses to disappear quietly. She refuses to become a footnote. Her supporters rally. Egyptian generals and mercenaries join her cause. You see tents rising on the horizon, banners snapping in the desert wind. Cleopatra is no longer simply a queen, she's a contender, building her own power base. Meanwhile, back in Alexandria, Ptolemy XIII's faction celebrates prematurely. They assume Cleopatra will crumble in exile. They assume she'll vanish into the sands, defeated. But you, walking beside her through a desert sunrise so bright it turns the world into molten gold, already know better. Cleopatra sharpened her mind for this moment. She learned politics for this. She studied diplomacy for this. And she understands something her enemies have forgotten. Deserts stretch far, but Cleopatra's ambition stretches further. As the sun climbs the sky, you sense the next move assembling like pieces on a hidden chessboard. The palace games are far from over. Cleopatra may be outnumbered, but she's never been outmatched. Soon, the arrival of a certain Roman general will tilt everything, turning the throne of Egypt into the deadliest game of strategy the ancient world has seen. For now, you take a slow breath and let the desert wind wash past you, knowing the battle for power has only just begun. You're still with Cleopatra as she moves across the desert, the horizon stretching out like a molten ribbon of gold, and you feel the air shift around her, no longer the perfumed sweetness of Alexandria's gardens, but the sharp, dry bite of survival. Exile isn't glamorous, and it definitely isn't comfortable, but Cleopatra steps into it like someone who understands that the throne of Egypt has never been for the faint of heart. The mainstream historical fact comes into view first. By early 48 BCE, Cleopatra was fully driven out of Alexandria by her brother Ptolemy XIII's advisors. But here's the quirky tidbit: some ancient writers claim she disguised herself during parts of her desert journey, traveling under guard but intentionally downplaying her royal identity to avoid ambushes. Historians still argue whether this detail is true or just a dramatic flourish added centuries later. But it certainly fits the energy of a woman who survives by being both queen and chameleon. You walk beside her as she approaches Pelusium, the frontier city where Egypt meets the restless world beyond. Tents ripple like sails in the wind, soldiers polish bronze shields, camels groan in protest at, well, honestly everything. And Cleopatra's supporters multiply by the day. She's 20 or so now, young, yes, but the kind of young that has already weathered palace treachery, political banishment, and a family so complicated that modern group therapists would refuse the job. A light joke nudge your thoughts. You imagine Cleopatra updating her resume skills, diplomacy, languages, desert survival, avoiding assassination by relatives. Another joke follows as you picture her giving her soldiers pep talks like, "We're totally going back to Alexandria, eventually, once the sand stops getting into everything." And a final joke drifts in when you think of Cleopatra looking at her travel rations and whispering, "I miss figs, I miss wine, I miss not sweating constantly." But beneath the humor, you sense something powerful rising. Cleopatra is learning resilience in real time. Every grain of sand, every blister on her feet, every curtained whisper of betrayal fuels her resolve. She studies the mood of her troops, listens to regional leaders, gathers intel from merchants and nomads who cross the border. She's forming not just a comeback but a strategy. Days pass, with slow, shimmering heat beating against your shoulders. Cleopatra negotiates for loyalty with more clarity than any ruler twice her age. Remember, she's trained her mind for this moment: politics, geography, diplomacy, religion, rhetoric. The kind of ruler who can quote philosophers at sunrise and plan military calls by noon. You feel her absorbing the landscape the way other people collect stories she reads, the way the Nile's eastern branch curves toward Pelusium, how caravans bring information from Syria, how shifting Roman alliances might determine Egypt's immediate future. And then news arrives that shakes the desert air itself. Julius Caesar has come to Egypt, not as a friend, not as a guest, but as a conquering force chasing his rival Pompey, who has fled to Alexandria seeking refuge. The ripple this creates across Cleopatra's camp feels electric. You watch messengers run between tents, scrolls clutched tightly, sand scattering behind their feet. Cleopatra's eyes sharpen. She knows instantly what this means. The internal Egyptian conflict has just collided with the Roman civil war. And anyone smart like Cleopatra understands that Caesar represents both danger and opportunity on a scale even her palace upbringing couldn't prepare her for. Historians still debate whether Cleopatra expected Caesar's arrival or if it caught her mid-strategy. Some say she had already tried reaching out to Roman patrons during her exile. Others insist she was simply quick enough to adapt when Caesar's ships appeared like silver blades along the coast. What is certain is this: she decides to act before Ptolemy's faction can win Caesar's favor. You feel her mind spinning like a potter's wheel, fast, controlled, reshaping plans with each breath. She realizes she can't march back to Alexandria with an army. Civil war would destroy what's left of Egypt. Instead, she needs to slip in, speak to Caesar directly, and convince him she, not her brother's manipulative advisors, is Egypt's rightful ruler. But reaching him quietly? That's the real challenge. Ptolemy XIII and his council have locked down access to Caesar, hoping to present their narrative first. Cleopatra isn't on the guest list. She isn't even allowed near the city. So, she does what Cleopatra always does. When the straightforward path is blocked, she invents a new path entirely. You watch her plan take shape in the flicker of firelight as the desert wind sweeps sand over the camp. She will return to Alexandria not as an exiled queen with an army, but as a whisper, as a story, as a presence that appears out of nowhere, because Caesar respects boldness, and Cleopatra was practically raised on boldness. Night deepens, the stars stretching over the desert like a quilt woven from crushed diamonds, and Cleopatra prepares for the journey back toward the palace that cast her out. You feel the soft pressure of tension in your chest as she gathers a few trusted companions, wraps herself against the cold, and studies the horizon. This will be dangerous. This will be risky. This will be a gamble worthy of a legend. But you walk beside her knowing that something extraordinary is about to happen, something involving a rolled-up carpet, a stunned Roman general, and the moment Egypt's future takes a sharp, irreversible turn. For now, though, you exhale as the desert cools around you. The winds are changing. Cleopatra is returning home, and the game she's about to play has rules written in ambition, strategy, and the unmistakable glow of destiny. You follow Cleopatra under a moon so bright it turns the desert into silver dust, and her footsteps grow faster, more decisive, as Alexandria's glow flickers on the horizon like a buried ember. She's heading straight back into the palace that exiled her, but she's not walking through the front gate with soldiers trumpeting her arrival. No, she's planning something far bolder, the kind of move that future storytellers will repeat for centuries with a wink. The mainstream historical fact is irresistible. Cleopatra personally met Julius Caesar in Alexandria by secretly entering the palace wrapped inside a carpet, or possibly, as some scholars insist, a linen sack. And here comes the quirky tidbit. One ancient writer claims the poor servant carrying her stumbled from exhaustion, nearly dropping the queen onto Caesar's floor. Historians still argue whether the entire carpet story is dramatized or mostly true, but whichever version you choose, the energy remains the same. Cleopatra understood theatrical entrances. You slip into Alexandria behind her, weaving through its narrow alleys and wide boulevards as dawn begins to bruise the sky. The city is tense. Roman soldiers march along the waterfront. Merchants whisper about Pompey's gruesome fate, how Ptolemy XIII's advisors had him killed in an attempt to impress Caesar, only to horrify him instead. It's one of those political miscalculations so spectacular, you almost expect to hear dramatic music in the background. A small joke flickers through your thoughts. Imagine Ptolemy's advisors, chest-puffed, announcing Pompey's head like a welcome gift, only for Caesar to react as if they'd just handed him a rotten fish. Another joke follows as you picture Caesar thinking, "I didn't come all this way to watch children run foreign policy." And a final joke nudges in when you imagine Cleopatra hearing about the fiasco and whispering to herself, "Perfect. I'm absolutely going to look like the reasonable sibling now," but the stakes are carved deep. The political landscape is a chaotic tapestry, Caesar furious, Pompey dead, Alexandria on edge, and two young monarchs vying for Rome's approval. Ptolemy XIII thinks he has the advantage because he reached Caesar first. Cleopatra knows that advantage is fragile. Influence is not a line, it's a moment. It's timing. It's the ability to make an impression that shoves aside every other voice in the room. And Cleopatra is about to make the greatest impression of her life. You follow her to the palace's shadowed perimeter. The walls loom above you, massive, ancient, flanking corridors lit by fire bowls that smear gold across the stone. Guards patrol, Roman helmets flashing in the dim light. Ptolemy's officers swarm around Caesar's quarters, hoping to shape his perception. But Cleopatra, crouched beneath a colonnade with her closest confidant Apollodorus, doesn't flinch. This is the moment. Apollodorus brings out the tightly rolled carpet or sack, depending on which storyteller you trust, and Cleopatra climbs inside, her body curling in the darkness, the linen brushing her cheek. You imagine the mix of nerves and excitement tightening in her chest, the Queen of Egypt wrapped up like contraband, slipping into her own palace as a bundle carried on someone's back. A gust of sea breeze touches your face as the servant lifts her, grunting under the weight, and begins walking straight towards Caesar's guarded entrance. You move alongside him, heart thudding in rhythm with every step. Roman guards glance but do not question him after all. Traders and servants come and go with deliveries constantly. He's waved through. You pass marble columns, torchlit corridors, and finally reach the private chambers where Caesar is conferring with advisors over maps, scrolls, and the fresh diplomatic disaster Ptolemy's faction created. And then it happens. The servant sets the bundle down. Hands unfurl the linen, and Cleopatra rises from the folds like a flame escaping a lamp, young, poised, eyes bright with intelligence and determination. The moment freezes in the air. Caesar, scarred by wars, weighed down by politics, exhausted by betrayal, stares like someone who just found the plot twist of his life. She speaks, calm, controlled, confident. You can almost hear her voice soft like honey, sharp like strategy, explaining her exile, the corruption of Ptolemy's advisors, her rightful claim to the throne, and the stability she could bring to Egypt. She does not beg, she does not flatter. She presents herself as an equal to Caesar, not a supplicant. And Caesar, who respects boldness above nearly everything, listens. This is your reality check moment. Cleopatra didn't win Caesar over with beauty alone, a tired myth repeated by writers who underestimated her. She won him through audacity, intelligence, fluency, and timing. A woman who speaks 9 languages, navigates politics like a chess master, and emerges from a smuggled package to negotiate face-to-face? Hard to ignore. Historians still debate whether Caesar was instantly impressed or gradually persuaded, but you feel the energy crackling between them, two master strategists recognizing each other. He agrees to hear her case. He decides both siblings must present their arguments. And in that choice, Cleopatra secures the opening she needs. Word spreads quickly. Ptolemy XIII storms into the chamber when he hears Cleopatra is with Caesar, his young face twisted in outrage, robes flapping behind him. His advisors panic. Roman guards position themselves between factions. For a heartbeat, it feels like the world might collapse into violence right there on the palace floor. But Caesar raises a hand, calm and commanding. Order returns. The Roman general now holds the future of Egypt in his palm. And as you walk beside Cleopatra, Stepping back from the meeting chamber into a quiet colonnade warmed by the morning sun, you sense her exhale, not in relief, but in recognition. She's back in the game. She's shifted the board. The war that will follow is far from over, but tonight you rest for a moment under the soft murmur of palace fountains, knowing Cleopatra has made her move and Alexandria will never be the same. You barely have time to catch your breath before Alexandria erupts into a storm that makes all previous palace drama look like warm-up exercises. The meeting with Caesar has shifted the balance, and you can feel the city tightening like someone plucked a harp string and let it vibrate through every street, corridor, and alleyway. Cleopatra has reclaimed her place beside Julius Caesar, and Ptolemy XIII's faction reacts exactly as expected, with outrage, panic, and a level of denial that would impress even the most stubborn modern politician. The mainstream historical fact is clear. Cleopatra and Caesar's alliance sparked a civil war in Egypt, culminating in what's now known as the Alexandrian War. The quirky tidbit? Ancient sources describe the battles taking place around the royal harbour and even spilling into the courtyard of the Great Library. Imagine trying to study while catapults thump in the distance. Historians still argue whether the library itself was damaged during these clashes, but the image lingers like smoke. You walk through the palace afterward, the air turning chilly as tension thickens. Caesar summons both Cleopatra and Ptolemy XIII, declaring they will rule jointly as their father intended. It's a diplomatic gesture, but everyone in the room knows the truth. Ptolemy XIII's advisors would rather lick a crocodile than share power with Cleopatra again. The boy king stands trembling at Caesar's decree, his face twisting between fury and humiliation. He storms out, his advisors rush after him, and you can sense the fuse catching fire. That night, Alexandria glows under torchlight, but the usual festival-like warmth is gone. Roman soldiers fortify strategic points. Cleopatra's supporters whisper through the palace like a rising tide, and Ptolemy XIII's faction rallies troops across the city. You hear metal scraping on stone, armor clinking, voices shouting commands. Egypt is about to fight itself while Rome stands at the center of the storm. A soft joke edges into your mind, something like, "Leave it to the Ptolemies to turn shared rule into an action movie within 24 hours. Another joke follows as you imagine Caesar rubbing his temples and muttering, "I came here to chase Pompey, not babysit a royal meltdown." And a final joke sneaks through as you picture Alexandria's citizens sighing, "Great, so the taxes are definitely going up after this, right?" But the humor evaporates when dawn breaks. War arrives with brutal swiftness. You stand beside Cleopatra on the palace balcony as smoke rises from the city's waterfront. Ptolemy's generals march troops through the streets. Their objective is simple: trap Caesar's limited forces at the palace, starve them out, and eliminate Cleopatra once and for all. But Caesar is nothing if not quick thinking. He seizes the royal harbour. Roman soldiers move like a machine, taking ships, securing supply routes, and fortifying the palace district. You hear the clash of swords, the thud of siege engines rolling into place, and the sharp cries of lookouts signaling enemy movements. Alexandria itself becomes a labyrinth of strategy. You move through the palace corridors behind Cleopatra as she confers with Caesar. She watches maps unfurl across marble tables, soldiers pushing tiny figurines representing armies. Her expression is calm even as the floor trembles from distant combat. She knows this war will determine whether she regains her throne or disappears from history. Meanwhile, Ptolemy XIII's faction brings reinforcements. Thousands of Egyptian soldiers, unfamiliar with Roman discipline but fiercely loyal to their king. The battles rage across the city, rooftop archers, barricaded streets, ships ramming each other at the harbour mouth. You smell smoke, hear metal scraping stone, feel adrenaline thrum under your skin. Historians still debate whether Cleopatra participated in strategic planning or simply observed, but you feel her mind working beside Caesar, absorbing every detail, calculating risks, suggesting ways to leverage her supporters in the eastern delta. She stands close enough for her presence to anchor him, yet independent enough to show she is not a passive bystander. Weeks pass with fire and thunder. Caesar's position grows desperate. Supplies dwindle. Water runs short. Roman soldiers sleep in shifts, always within reach of their weapons. Cleopatra's loyalists attempt to cut through the city to reach the palace, but Ptolemy's forces block nearly every route. Then comes the turning point. Reinforcements arrive not from Egypt, but from Syria. Mithridates of Pergamum, an ally of Caesar, marches toward Alexandria with a mixed army of Romans, Jews, and local militias. Cleopatra had quietly coordinated with him from her camp months earlier, an alliance that now ignites hope. You travel with Cleopatra to the palace rooftop as word spreads. Mithridates has crossed the frontier. He is drawing closer each day. Ptolemy XIII panics. His commanders scramble to intercept Mithridates before he reaches the city. Caesar seizes the opportunity, launching a coordinated attack to break out of Alexandria. You feel the ground shake as Roman cavalry mounts up, shields gleaming. Cleopatra watches as Caesar rides out determined, resolute, refusing to let a teenage king and his advisors outplay him. The battle that follows is brutal but decisive. Caesar joins forces with Mithridates, and together they crush Ptolemy XIII's army near the Nile. And in one of those historical moments that feels too dramatic to be real, Ptolemy XIII attempts to flee across the river only for his boat to overturn. He drowns in the Nile he once ruled, swallowed by the same water that shaped Egypt's destiny. The air in Alexandria changes instantly. The smoke clears, the shouting fades. Roman banners rise along the palace walls. And Cleopatra, standing beside Caesar as the river winds through the city, realizes the war is truly over. Egypt has a queen again. You feel her exhale slow, steady, triumphant, as the weight of exile, betrayal, and battlefield smoke finally lifts from her shoulders. She has not only survived her family's deadly game, she has reshaped it entirely. And Caesar, watching her with respect, knows he has helped elevate one of the most formidable rulers in the ancient world. Tomorrow will bring diplomacy, reconstruction, and a new political chapter. But tonight, you let the warm Alexandria breeze settle around you, the fires dying down to embers, the future beginning to glow in Cleopatra's eyes. You walk with Cleopatra through the palace as the smoke of war finally begins to thin, drifting away like a bad memory carried off by the Mediterranean breeze. Alexandria feels different now, lighter, steadier, as if the city itself has decided it can breathe again. The torches along the corridors burn cleanly. The fountains murmur instead of shuddering with distant thunder. And right at the center of this freshly restored calm stands Cleopatra, no longer an exiled queen clawing her way back, but a ruler reborn in victory. The mainstream historical fact is clear. After Ptolemy XIII's death, Caesar confirmed Cleopatra as Queen of Egypt, making her co-ruler with her youngest brother, Ptolemy XIV. But here comes the quirky tidbit. Some ancient writers claimed Cleopatra celebrated her reinstatement with a ceremony so elaborate that even Caesar found himself blinking at the amount of gold involved. Historians still argue whether this was just typical Ptolemaic flair or Cleopatra's pointed reminder that she was no one's puppet. You accompany her into the palace audience chamber, where marble pillars rise like frozen tree trunks and the floor gleams with polished veining. Servants rush to prepare spaces that had been abandoned during the fighting. Scholars return, dusting scrolls and adjusting cracked lamps. Musicians test their instruments, plucking tentative notes that flutter through the air like butterflies returning after a storm. Cleopatra steps forward wearing the double crown Upper and Lower Egypt united, and you feel that subtle shift in her posture. She is fully queen now, not a claimant, not a negotiator, not a fugitive wrapped in a carpet. A queen. There's a soft joke in your head as you picture her inner monologue. Okay, so, throne secured. Next up, making sure Rome doesn't accidentally turn Egypt into a weekend project. Another joke strolls in as you imagine her younger brother, newly elevated to co-ruler, thinking, "Yay, I'm king," while Cleopatra gently pats his head like, "Yes, sweetie, and I'm the one actually signing everything." And a final joke tiptoes in, when you imagine Caesar walking through the palace admiring Egyptian architecture while Cleopatra casually drops, "Oh, that obelisk? It's older than your entire empire." But beneath the humor, the responsibilities stack high. Egypt is wounded. Alexandria is scarred. Trade routes faltered during the war. Crops suffered. Temples starved for maintenance. Treasuries thinned. And Cleopatra, who has just survived a civil war, now turns to the monumental task of healing her kingdom. You wander through the bustling streets beside her, feeling the hum of life rushing back. Merchants reopen their stalls, spreading fragrant spices and gleaming glassware. Fishermen return to the harbor with nets heavy again. Priests conduct purification rites along the Nile, smoke drifting skyward as prayers rise for stability. Cleopatra's first moves are deliberate. She ensures grain shipments resume. She reduces certain taxes strangling lower classes. She restores stipends for scholars at the Library of Alexandria because she knows knowledge is power and Egypt must reclaim its intellectual brilliance. And then, of course, comes Caesarion. You follow Cleopatra into her private chambers, where she introduces her newborn son, the child historians widely believe is Julius Caesar's. His birth in 47 BCE reshapes the political landscape more profoundly than any battle. Cleopatra names him Ptolemy 15 The Caesar, but everyone quickly calls him Caesarion, Little Caesar. The palace murmurs with rumors, but Cleopatra stands radiant, holding her son with the serenity of someone who knows she has just added a living cornerstone to her dynasty. She's not content with mere survival. She is building a legacy. Historians still debate whether Caesar acknowledged Caesarion formally. Some sources say yes, others insist he refused. But in this moment, you see the certainty in Cleopatra's eyes. Her son will tie Egypt's destiny to Rome's, not through chains, but through blood. Life inside the palace settles into a rhythm. Cleopatra governs with a meticulous balance, her Greek ancestry supporting administrative reforms, her Egyptian devotion anchoring her spiritually to the people. She visits temples, consults priests, reviews legal cases, and manages Egypt's extensive bureaucracy with the same precision she once used to slip past palace guards. You accompany her to Philae, where the priests of Isis welcome her as a living embodiment of the goddess. Incense curls around you like warm mist as Cleopatra stands before the sacred lake, her silhouette reflected in shimmering water. You hear the chants rising, the steady beat of ceremonial drums, and feel the weight of thousands of years of tradition settling onto her shoulders. But even here, in the hushed sanctuary, she thinks ahead. She knows Rome is watching. She knows Caesar's favor won't last forever if she falters. She knows her enemies, both old and new, are waiting for her to slip. So she governs with sharp intelligence. She rebuilds Egypt's navy. She strengthens border defenses. She revitalizes trade with Arabia, Nubia, and Cyprus. You feel the gears turning inside her mind, always calculating, always adapting. And yet, there are softer moments too. In the gardens she walks with Caesar, now relaxing between campaigns. You hear their conversations drifting like low music, politics blended with philosophy, logistics blended with laughter. Cleopatra challenges him intellectually. He enjoys her nerve. They are not simply lovers. They are two rulers shaping a region with each shared decision. But Alexandria is not Rome. And Egypt, in all its beauty and complexity, stirs whispers from Roman senators who already resent Caesar's dominance. Cleopatra senses the tension. She always does. She listens when diplomats speak of unrest in Rome. She studies the tone of Caesar's letters. She keeps her ear to the political ground, knowing the world beyond Egypt is shifting like a restless sea. For now, though, peace fragile but real rests on Egypt. The fires of war have cooled. The Nile flows steady. The Queen stands strong. And you breathe in the warm night air, with Cleopatra as lanterns sway above the harbour, painting ripples across the water. Soon, she will travel to Rome herself. Soon, the stakes will rise even higher. But tonight, Egypt glows with renewed life, and Cleopatra reborn, powerful, unshaken rules, as though the gods themselves placed a crown upon her brow. You drift through the palace courtyard with Cleopatra as a warm Mediterranean wind stirs the lotus blooms floating in the fountains, and a new current begins pulling at Egypt's queen, one that reaches far beyond the Nile. Word has spread across the palace. Julius Caesar wants Cleopatra to visit Rome, and not as a quiet guest slipping in through side doors. He wants her to arrive as a monarch, a statement, a symbol, maybe even a warning. The mainstream historical fact is straightforward. In 46 BCE, Cleopatra traveled to Rome with her young son Caesarion. But the quirky tidbit? Ancient gossip claims she brought so much luxury with her that locals complained the city suddenly smelled like exotic incense for weeks. Historians still argue whether Romans were dazzled or horrified by her arrival, but they agree on one thing: Cleopatra never went anywhere quietly. You walk beside her as she prepares for the journey. Servants pack crates of scrolls, gifts of gold-worked statues, perfumes sealed in alabaster jars, and even court musicians. Caesar has invited her to his villa across the Tiber, an honor no foreign leader receives lightly. Yet you can feel Cleopatra's hesitation. Egypt is her heart. Leaving it is leaving part of herself behind. A little joke nudges into your mind, something like Cleopatra making a packing list and thinking, should I bring 10 chests of treasure or 12? Rome might be chilly. Another joke arrives as you imagine her practicing Latin greetings with tutors who mutter, "They'll understand you," eventually. And one final joke drifts in when you picture Caesarion, barely toddling, grabbing priceless artifacts while servants panic in slow motion. But beneath the humor, Cleopatra feels the gravity of what she's about to do. The political optics, the danger, the opportunity. Rome is not merely Caesar's home, it's the beating heart of the ancient world, a city where senators sharpen their arguments like blades and alliances collapse with a whisper. You board the royal barge with her as it glides down the Nile toward Alexandria's harbour. Sunlight glints off gilded railings. Sailcloth snaps above you. Priests bless the voyage. Citizens gather along the banks, cheering their queen with a mixture of pride and curiosity. Many have never seen their ruler venture beyond Egypt's borders. The Mediterranean voyage is long, but you feel the rhythm of the sea calming Cleopatra's thoughts. She stands at the prow, hair lifted by the wind, gazing at the horizon with the composure of someone mapping out two worlds in her mind. Egypt behind her, Rome ahead, tradition behind her, transformation ahead. When her ship finally enters the Tiber River, the city unfolds like a restless giant, noisy, sprawling, chaotic, endlessly alive. Rome does not shimmer with the polished elegance of Alexandria. No, Rome feels raw. Its buildings cluster like quarrelsome relatives. Its marketplaces roar with voices. Its streets are choked with carts, animals, and people shouting over each other about politics, bread prices, or gladiator gossip. You can practically hear Romans muttering when Cleopatra steps ashore. "Oh no, she's beautiful and powerful. We're doomed." Her arrival stirs the city like a ladle in a pot. Senators whisper behind bronze doors. Poets scribble scandalous verses. Aristocrats pretend not to stare while very much staring. Cleopatra becomes the talk of every dinner, every bathhouse, every forum. And Julius Caesar? He seems entirely unbothered. In fact, he places a golden statue of Cleopatra in the temple of Venus Genitrix, his claimed ancestor, which triggers so many eyebrows to shoot upward, you half expect them to break orbit. Cleopatra sees the gesture for what it is, a declaration. Caesar is aligning himself with her publicly, politically, symbolically. Historians still debate whether Caesar intended to marry Cleopatra, or whether he simply enjoyed keeping the Senate slightly terrified. But as you walk with her through the gardens of Caesar's villa, you sense the ease between them. Conversations flow like the fountains around you. Politics, philosophy, governance, astronomy, even jokes about Roman bureaucracy, which, shockingly, is even worse than Egypt's on a bad day. Yet Cleopatra notices everything. The hostility of senators who see her as a foreign threat, the envy of Roman noblewomen whispering behind fans, the murmurs that Caesar is becoming a king in all but name, the subtle weight of eyes tracking her in public. Rome doesn't do subtlety well. Its politics are performed like theatre, loud and vicious. Cleopatra walks through forums and colonnades with careful grace, always aware that even a misplaced gesture could feed the Senate's growing resentment towards Caesar. You accompany her to one of Caesar's triumphs, a massive parade celebrating his victories. The cheering crowds jostle like a living tide. Exotic animals parade past, painted floats depict conquered lands, and Cleopatra stands beside Caesar, the two of them framed in theatrical splendor. Some Romans applaud her, others glare. All of them watch. Then comes the moment no one can ignore. Caesar is declared dictator for 10 years. Soon after, dictator for life. Cleopatra feels the shift. She sees senators' faces tighten like fists. She knows that Rome, unlike Egypt, doesn't tolerate absolute power, even from someone as brilliant as Caesar. And then, like a lightning bolt cleaving a clear sky, comes the Ides of March. You stand with Cleopatra in Caesar's villa when news arrives. Whispers rush in with the cold wind. Caesar has been assassinated, stabbed in the Senate, surrounded, betrayed. The world cracks under Cleopatra's feet. You feel her heart drop, her breath catch. She is far from home, far from safety, and the political shield she leaned on has shattered. Historians still argue whether Cleopatra considered staying in Rome to negotiate with Caesar's killers or fleeing immediately. But the answer becomes clear when mobs fill the streets, when fires ignite, when Mark Antony delivers his funeral speech that shakes the city's sanity. Rome is no place for her now. Not with a child linked to Caesar by blood, not with senators who fear her influence. not with Octavian rising like a steel-edged shadow. Cleopatra slips out of the city, quietly, swiftly, back toward Egypt, back toward the Nile, back toward the role she must reclaim alone. Tonight, you watch Rome fade behind her as she sails into open water, the waves whispering a warning she already knows by heart. The world has changed. The stakes have risen. The next chapter will pull her deeper into the deadliest political game of her life. You feel the wind shift as Cleopatra sails away from Rome, the waves slapping against the hull with a rhythm that sounds almost like a heartbeat, steady, urgent, impossible to ignore. She stands at the stern, her cloak billowing behind her, eyes fixed on the horizon that leads her back to Egypt, back to her throne, back to a world she now must guard alone. The mainstream historical fact reaches you right away. Julius Caesar's assassination in 44 BCE sent shockwaves across the ancient world, leaving Cleopatra isolated and exposed. But here's the quirky tidbit. Some accounts say Cleopatra predicted political doom weeks before the Ides of March, allegedly telling close confidants that Rome felt like a city holding its breath. Historians still argue whether she truly sensed the danger, or whether the story was added later to paint her as eerily perceptive. You stay beside her as the Roman coastline disappears into the mist. The weight of what just happened drapes across her shoulders like a heavy mantle. Caesar is gone. The Senate has turned into a nest of vipers, and Rome, already suspicious of Cleopatra, is now a furnace of paranoia and ambition. Her statue in the Temple of Venus will survive the chaos, but her standing in the city is shattered. She is no longer the favored foreign queen. She is now a political liability tied to a murdered ruler. A soft, bittersweet joke floats through your thoughts, imagining Cleopatra whispering, "Great," just when Rome was starting to get used to my eyeliner. Another joke rises as you picture Roman senators scribbling. Furious notes. To-do list. 1. Avoid Cleopatra. 2. Avoid Caesarion. 3. Avoid getting stabbed like Caesar. And a final joke slips in when you imagine Cleopatra packing up Caesarion, murmuring, "We are absolutely not sticking around for Act 2 of this disaster." Yet beneath your little smiles, the seriousness deepens. Caesarion is now her lifeline and her most dangerous possession. He is Caesar's son, at least in Cleopatra's eyes, and possibly in Caesar's as well. That bloodline makes him a threat to Octavian, Caesar's named heir. Cleopatra knows this. She feels it. That's why she's leaving Rome the moment the city begins to boil. The journey back to Egypt takes weeks. Nights on deck are quiet, the constellations of the southern sky shifting slowly overhead. Cleopatra spends long hours watching Caesarion sleep, her fingers brushing his hair, her mind moving like a river carving new channels. You feel her determination harden not from grief, but from clarity. She may have lost Caesar, but she has not lost her destiny. When her ship finally cuts through Alexandria's harbour, the city rises before you like a dream she left in another life. The Pharos lighthouse still burns, the streets still buzz with trade, the palace still gleams with gold accents, but everything feels sharper now, as if Cleopatra sees her home with new eyes, aware that the world beyond Egypt is shifting in ways she must anticipate if she intends to survive. News of Caesar's death has already reached the city. Advisors rush to her side. Priests whisper prayers. Ordinary citizens gather just to see their queen return, many wondering whether Rome's chaos will spill across the Mediterranean. Cleopatra steps ashore with Caesarion in her arms, and you feel the weight of expectation settle onto her like a second cloak. She wastes no time. She orders new fortifications. She expands the navy. She strengthens alliances with Nubia and Cyprus. She channels money into grain storage, anticipating instability in Roman trade. She increases temple festivals, aligning herself tightly with Egyptian devotion. You see her in the Hall of Stellis, consulting with mathematicians, astronomers, and shipwrights, her mind darting through solutions faster than scribes can record. Cleopatra is not mourning. She is preparing. Historians still debate how deeply she was affected personally by Caesar's death, whether she grieved passionately or turned immediately to strategy. But what you witness here is a queen who understands that emotion must bend to the needs of a kingdom. Still, the nights in the palace feel different now. You walk past Cleopatra's chamber and sense her awake at odd hours, the balcony curtains billowing as she watches the moonlit harbour. Perhaps remembering quiet conversations in Rome, perhaps calculating 100 possible futures. And Egypt itself responds to her with a kind of collective exhale. The people trust her. She's proven her intelligence, her resilience, her ability to rebuild. But they also sense that Rome's knives are long, and the threat across the sea has changed form. News arrives from Italy. A fragile alliance has formed between Octavian, Mark Antony, and Lepidus, something called the Second Triumvirate. Together, they are purging Rome of Caesar's assassins, executing enemies, and seizing property. It's ruthless political housecleaning. Cleopatra's expression tightens when she hears the names. Octavian ambitious, cold, calculating. Lepidus politically useful, but not especially important. And then Antony. Mark Antony, Caesar's trusted general. The man whose oration at Caesar's funeral sparked riots. The man who sees himself as the heir to Caesar's military legacy. The man who, when angry or amused, is known to make decisions so impulsive, entire provinces tremble. You feel Cleopatra's mind shift. Antony is powerful, charismatic, influential, and unlike Octavian, he already knows who Cleopatra is, or at least who she was with Caesar. Their paths never crossed in Rome, but their reputations crossed oceans. Soon enough, Antony begins summoning rulers from across the eastern Mediterranean. He wants alliances, ships, resources, stability in the provinces, and among the rulers he expects to report to him stands the Queen of Egypt. Cleopatra knows this is the moment she must choose: approach Antony on her terms, or let him summon her like a provincial governor. Her answer is already forming. As clear and sharp as a blade drawn in moonlight, the next chapter of Cleopatra's life will not unfold in Rome. It will unfold in the east on a riverbank, where two titans of ambition are destined to collide. Tonight, you listen to the waves whisper along Alexandria's shore, feeling the future gathering momentum. The path ahead leads to Mark Antony, a meeting that will ignite passion, alliance, spectacle, and war. And Cleopatra, steady and luminous as a temple flame, stands ready. You wake to the soft hush of waves brushing Alexandria's shoreline, and Cleopatra is already there, standing on the balcony, wrapped in a linen cloak, staring eastward as the sun ignites the water with molten gold. She knows the winds of power have shifted again. Caesar's death broke the old world, and the second triumvirate, Antony, Octavian, and Lepidus, are stitching a new one together with war-hardened hands. And now, Mark Antony wants Cleopatra. Or rather, he wants Egypt's wealth, Egypt's ships, Egypt's stability, and yes, Egypt's queen, whom he underestimates at his own peril. The mainstream historical fact sets the scene. In 41 BCE, Antony summoned Cleopatra to Tarsus to explain why she hadn't supported the triumvirate during the civil wars. But the quirky tidbit? Ancient sources say Cleopatra didn't simply show up. She turned her entrance into a floating myth, arriving on a barge draped in purple sails and perfumed so heavily that the scent lingered along the riverbanks for hours. Historians still argue whether this was propaganda or real life, but honestly, you've seen enough of Cleopatra by now to know she absolutely would. You move with her through the palace as she prepares to meet Antony not as a subordinate, but as an equal. Advisors hover nervously, warning her that Antony is unpredictable, courageous, generous, dangerous, and wildly charismatic. Cleopatra simply raises an eyebrow. She's already survived Caesar. She can handle a general who thinks a good strategy meeting includes wine, laughter, and possibly setting a tent on fire. A soft joke nudges into your mind. Cleopatra checking her schedule. Tuesday. Stabilize economy. Wednesday. Charm Roman warlord. Thursday. Try not to start a war with flair. Another joke follows as you imagine Antony's envoys arriving stiff and formal, only to stumble over their words when Cleopatra walks in wearing a crown that could double as a solar eclipse. And one final joke trickles in as you picture Cleopatra telling her shipbuilders, "Nothing says diplomacy like sails dyed with crushed sea snails." But beneath the humor is a sharpened edge. Cleopatra must get this right. Antony is no ordinary Roman. He commands armies, he inspires loyalty, he has half the Senate shaking in their sandals. So she crafts her plan with the precision of a master strategist and the theatrical genius of a queen who understands that politics begins long before the first word is spoken. You board her legendary barge with her. The air is thick with the scent of cinnamon and myrrh. Musicians sit ready, strings tuned. Servants sprinkle petals across the deck. The sails above you shimmer lavender in the sun, and Cleopatra steps forward dressed as the goddess Isis, gold gleaming at her wrists, hair braided like flowing ink. The crowd along the riverbank at Tarsus gasps. Soldiers forget their orders. Fishermen drop nets. Even the river seems to pause. because Cleopatra does not walk into meetings. Cleopatra arrives. And Antony? He hears the commotion long before he sees her. You watch him stride out onto the riverfront, broad-shouldered, battle-scarred, eyes sparkling with both curiosity and mischief. This is a man who thrives on momentum and spectacle, someone who can turn a battlefield into a stage. But when Cleopatra's barge drifts into view, even he has to stop and blink. Historians still debate whether Antony fell for Cleopatra instantly or gradually. But in this moment, you see something shift in him. A spark, a recognition, a fascination with a woman who matches his confidence note for note. He sends her an invitation to dine with him. Cleopatra politely declines, and instead invites him to dine on her ship. You feel Antony laugh, not mockingly, but delighted. Cleopatra isn't bowing to him. She's meeting him on her terms, and he loves it. That night, the feast is a riot of color, sound, and intoxicating perfume. The dishes arrive like a parade: stuffed birds, honey cakes, delicate fish glazed with wine sauces, fruit chilled in ice shipped from mountain peaks. Musicians play in soft waves, servants glide like shadows, and Cleopatra sits across from Antony with the composure of a queen discussing trade routes while also casually redefining charm. Antony tries to impress her. Cleopatra lets him try. But every time he speaks, she counters with wit, with knowledge, with cool, unhurried confidence. You feel him melt a little more each minute. Cleopatra doesn't flirt like a courtier. She negotiates like a ruler. And Antony, accustomed to commanding men with a shout, finds himself leaning forward, listening, intrigued. She explains why she didn't support the triumvirate earlier. She outlines Egypt's political needs. She makes it clear that partnership, not submission, is on the table. You sense Antony respecting her more with every sentence. And then there's the wine. Antony loves wine. Cleopatra tolerates wine. But she never misses an opportunity. So she matches him cup for cup, letting him believe she's drinking as heavily as he is while quietly pacing herself. A light joke flits across your thoughts. Cleopatra mentally counting her sips like, "That's enough, Mark. I actually need to remember this conversation." When the evening ends, Antony walks away, impressed, amused, slightly dazzled, and already thinking about tomorrow's meeting. But Cleopatra returns to her cabin, removes her heavy crown, and allows herself the smallest smile. Not a romantic smile, a strategic one. Antony is powerful. Antony is useful. Antony is human. And Cleopatra has just taken the upper hand. Historians still debate whether Cleopatra seduced Antony for love or power. But watching her here, you sense a truth bigger than either word. Cleopatra doesn't separate politics from emotion. She sees people as whole, both their strengths and their weaknesses, and she maneuvers through both with effortless grace. Over the next days, Antony summons Cleopatra again and again. Public meetings blur into private conversations. Military discussions melt into shared laughter. Antony begins to see her not as an Eastern monarch, but as a partner, intellectual, political, and increasingly personal. You can feel Egypt and Rome drawing closer with every passing moment, their destinies winding into a single thread. Soon, Cleopatra will bring Antony back to Alexandria. Soon, the partnership between them will ignite like oil touching flame. And soon, the world will watch as two titans build a dazzling, dangerous court that will shake the foundations of empires. Tonight, though, you stand on the deck as the moon paints the river silver, listening to the faint echo of Antony's laughter drifting across the water, foreshadowing a relationship that will change history. You return to Alexandria with Cleopatra, drifting through the harbor as the city wakes to the sound of gulls and ship masts clinking like wind chimes. But this time, she isn't returning alone. Mark Antony rides beside her, broad-shouldered, battle-worn, and wearing the kind of grin that tells the entire palace staff, "Yes, this is going to get interesting." His arrival sends a ripple through the city that feels almost electric. Alexandria, ever eager for spectacle, practically rolls out a red carpet made of gossip. And Cleopatra? She moves through it with the calm of someone who already knows the show she's about to put on. The mainstream historical fact lands softly in your ear. Cleopatra and Antony spent the winter of 4140 BCE together in Alexandria, forging both political alliance and personal partnership. The quirky tidbit? Ancient writers claim the two created a drinking club called the Inimitable Livers, where they competed in lavish games, pranks, and elaborate banquets. Historians still argue whether this was exaggerated moralizing by scandalized Roman authors or an actual club with guest lists and bylaws. But the vibe is absolutely right for these two. As you walk with Cleopatra into her palace, you feel the energy shift. This isn't Caesar's Rome, strict, marble, suspicious. This is Alexandria, colorful, musical, curious, loose-limbed with laughter and luxury. Antony fits into this city like a spark fits into dry kindling. He admires the art, he samples the wine, he tries on armor decorated in Egyptian style. And Cleopatra, watching him, smiles not like someone seducing him, but like someone recognizing a piece on the chessboard that finally moves the way she needs. A light joke stirs through your mind. Antony arriving at the palace like, I could get used to this, while Cleopatra thinks, yes, Mark, that is exactly the plan. Another joke drifts in as you imagine Antony's soldiers whispering, Sir, is this another party? And one final joke nudges as Cleopatra reviews her agenda. Morning, check grain reserves. Afternoon, negotiate trade with Arabia. Evening, win. Antony in a game of who can quote Homer more dramatically. But beneath the playfulness, their partnership deepens into something layered and strategic. Cleopatra shows Antony Egypt, not as a tourist, but as a ruler. She demonstrates how the Nile sustains millions, how ports connect continents, how temples preserve history older than Rome itself. She brings him into the rituals of Isis, guiding him through incense-filled sanctuaries where chants echo like eternity. She shows him the library, where scholars debate star charts by lamplight. Antony absorbs it all, wide-eyed, half in awe, half in love with the idea of Egypt as a world where he can be more than just a Roman general. A world where he isn't overshadowed by Caesar's ghost or Octavian's cold ambition. Historians still debate whether Antony fell more for Cleopatra or for Alexandria's intoxicating freedom. But you can see the truth here. It was both. Antony thrives in environments where intensity and pleasure intertwine, and Cleopatra offers exactly that, a place where power is wrapped in beauty, where strategy is wrapped in spectacle, and she doesn't let the spectacle rest for a moment. You walk with them through nights so bright with lanterns that the stars seem jealous. Banquets unfold like full-fledged productions. Dancers swirl. Gold cups overflow with wine. Musicians pluck melodies that curl around the marble pillars. Antony laughs until his voice cracks. Cleopatra teases him with riddles and wagers. They dine on dishes flavored with cinnamon, honey, and rare spices carried from caravans across the desert. Antony tries everything, sometimes twice, sometimes 3 times, usually while Cleopatra shakes her head like a mildly amused chaperone. But the nights are not all pleasure. Between the jokes and the games, they speak of war, politics, the triumvirate, Octavian's rise, and the shifting shape of the Roman world. Octavian is cautious, Antony says one night. And you are not, Cleopatra replies with a soft smile. How else does anyone rule? That depends, she says, on whether you wish to build or to burn. You feel their dynamic sharpening. Cleopatra challenges him in ways Rome never did. Antony listens in ways he rarely listens to anyone. She understands his strength, his pride, his impulsiveness. She sees that beneath the bravado is a man desperate to prove that he is Caesar's true successor, not Octavian. She knows how to help him. She knows how to use him. And she knows she cares about him, though she keeps that emotion wrapped in layers of calculation, like a jewel inside silk. One evening, the two of them sit atop a rooftop terrace overlooking Alexandria's glowing streets. The breeze tastes like salt and jasmine. Antony tells stories of campaigns, of battles, of soldiers who sang even as they bled. Cleopatra listens with her chin resting on her hand. Then she tells him about her childhood, about exile, about surviving her siblings' ambitions, about how power feels when it has to be earned rather than inherited. Antony listens, really listens. It's a rare moment of quiet between two people who spend their days shaping empires. Some historians still argue whether this winter was the happiest period of Cleopatra's life. Watching her here, her laughter soft, her resolve steady, her kingdom safe, you can imagine it might have been. But the winter cannot last forever. Messengers arrive from Rome like sharp gusts of cold wind. Octavian is consolidating power. Tensions among the triumvirate are rising. Land disputes are exploding. Antony is expected back. His absence fuels suspicion. His closeness to Cleopatra stokes rumors. Antony tries to delay. Cleopatra doesn't let him. A ruler must face battles, she tells him. A general must lead. A man of power must return to Rome. But she gives him something to return with: knowledge, resources, ships, promises, and something else too, though neither of them says it out loud: a bond that will reshape the world. As Antony prepares to leave, Cleopatra watches from the palace steps. The sea wind ripples her gown. She stands tall, regal, unshaken. Antony turns back once, twice, 3 times, as though afraid she might disappear if he looks away too long. You feel it in your chest. The next chapter of their story will not be soft. Rome will not welcome this alliance. Octavian will not tolerate rivals. And the world will soon learn what happens when love, ambition, and power fuse together in 2 of history's most formidable spirits. Tonight, Alexandria glows. Tomorrow, the storm gathers. You stand with Cleopatra in the cool hush of dawn, the palace still wrapped in shadows as Alexandria begins to stir. Antony has gone back across the Mediterranean, back into Rome's tangle of politics, back toward Octavian's tightening web. But Cleopatra's story isn't drifting into silence. In fact, it's sharpening into one of the boldest turning points of her reign. The moment when she and Antony reshape the Eastern world in ways that set every Roman senator clutching his pearls. The mainstream historical fact arrives first. In 34 BCE, Cleopatra and Antony staged the donations of Alexandria, a massive public ceremony where they redistributed kingdoms and titles to Cleopatra and her children, presenting her as Queen of Kings and Caesarion as King of Kings. The quirky tidbit: some ancient sources say the event was so elaborately staged that even the torches were scented with imported Arabian balsam. Historians still argue whether Antony intended to provoke Rome intentionally or if he simply underestimated the Senate's ability to overreact. But either way, Rome reacted exactly as you'd expect, with outrage, theatrics, and several senators threatening to faint dramatically. But that's the end of the road. You need to see how we get there. You walk alongside Cleopatra as she rebuilds the rhythms of her court after Antony's departure. She strengthens Egypt's fleet, expands trade, and keeps her scribes busier than over-caffeinated law students. Caesarion grows sharp-eyed, curious, already copying his mother's habit of tilting his head when absorbing new information. Cleopatra monitors every detail, every province, every diplomatic ripple across the Mediterranean, and then the messages begin. Scrolls sealed with Antony's mark, updates from Rome, reports of political chaos, descriptions of Octavian's growing influence. And beneath the formal language, Cleopatra senses something else in Antony's letters: an ache, a restless longing, a desire to return not just to Egypt but to her. When Antony finally does return in 37 BCE, the reunion is nothing like before. He arrives carrying the exhaustion of battles, the tension of Roman politics, and the frustration of dealing with Octavian. Cleopatra meets him in her private chambers, the lamplight soft and warm. You can feel the shift the moment they face each other. This is no longer a flirtation wrapped in wine and games. This is alliance. This is strategy. This is 2 rulers recognizing they need each other more than ever. Antony needs money, ships, and stability for his Parthian campaign. Cleopatra needs Rome on her side, or at least part of Rome. Together, they carve out a partnership sharper than a battle plan, and soon, a family. Cleopatra gives birth to twins, Alexander Helios and Cleopatra Selene. 2 children, born into a world already holding its breath. Historians still debate whether Antony saw them as heirs or political symbols, but watching him hold them clumsy, emotional, utterly entranced, you feel a tenderness rarely recorded in the history books. But tenderness does not stop enemies, and Octavian is growing impatient. You move with Cleopatra and Antony into the Hall of Thrones, where the scent of incense wraps around your ankles like smoke. Cleopatra is radiant, wearing gold woven so thin it drapes like sunlight. Antony stands beside her, armor gleaming, jaw tight with determination. Together, they outline a plan not just for Egypt, not just for Rome, but for the entire Eastern Mediterranean. They will create a dynasty, a network of client kingdoms, a vision where Cleopatra and Antony rule not from Rome, but from Alexandria, center of culture, trade, and ancient prestige. It's audacious. It's brilliant. It's also, politically speaking, the equivalent of poking a sleeping bear named Octavian repeatedly with a golden stick. And the moment that finally breaks, Rome's composure arrives in 34 BCE, the donations of Alexandria. You join the crowd gathered in the great square outside the palace. Columns tower above you, draped in purple banners embroidered with stars. Musicians fill the air with drums and flutes. The scent of incense drifts like melted amber. Cleopatra appears first radiant in the regalia of Isis, diamonds glittering in her crown like court starlight. Antony stands, beside her, in Roman dress, but styled deliberately with Eastern flourishes that whisper defiance. Then the ceremony begins. One by one, Cleopatra's children are brought forward. Titles rain upon them like divine gifts. Caesarion is declared King of Kings and the legitimate son of Julius Caesar. Alexander Helios is given Armenia, Media, and Parthia, lands not actually conquered yet, but Antony is optimistic. Cleopatra Selene receives Cyrene. The youngest son later receives Syria and surrounding territories. And Cleopatra, already Queen of Egypt, is proclaimed Queen of Kings, effectively the supreme monarch of all eastern territories under Antony's dominion. You feel the crowd gasp. Egyptians cheer loud, wild, jubilant. Alexandria erupts with pride. But across the sea, Rome reacts with fury. Tonight, as you walk through the palace gardens with Cleopatra, lanterns swaying softly overhead, you feel the stillness before the storm. Antony sits nearby, staring into the fountain reflections, knowing Octavian will not let this pass. Historians still debate whether Cleopatra and Antony understood how deeply they had provoked Rome. But listening to Cleopatra breathe slowly beside you, you sense she does know, and she accepts it. Because Cleopatra is not playing for Rome's approval. She's playing for her dynasty's future, for Caesarion's legitimacy, for Egypt's sovereignty, for the world she believes she can build. And Antony? He believes in her. Maybe too much. Maybe just enough. The air thickens. The night deepens. And in this quiet moment, you realize this ceremony wasn't a celebration. It was a declaration of war. You feel the air tighten around Alexandria like a drawn bowstring. The glow from the donations of Alexandria is still fresh, gold glittering on temple steps, torches still perfumed with exotic resin, but the political shockwaves have surged across the sea faster than Cleopatra's fastest courier. Rome is rattling. Rome is raging. And Rome is suddenly, violently obsessed with one woman, the Queen of Egypt. The mainstream historical fact arrives with a cold edge. After the donations, Octavian launched a full-scale propaganda war against Cleopatra, painting her as a foreign seductress manipulating Mark Antony to destroy Rome. But here comes the quirky tidbit according to one Roman writer. Octavian even commissioned small wooden dolls of Cleopatra to distribute around Rome, portraying her as a wicked sorceress, bewitching Antony. Historians still argue whether those dolls truly existed, or were just ancient political satire. But it fits perfectly with Octavian's creative talent for smear campaigns. You walk with Cleopatra through the palace as she reads the reports streaming in from Rome. Each scroll feels like a storm cloud cracking open. Senators are shocked. Citizens are outraged. Poets write venom. Propagandists work overtime. Octavian is feeding the flames with speeches so dramatic that even the actors in Roman theatres are applauding. Antony has become a villain. Cleopatra has become the villain. And Octavian has become the hero, at least in his own narrative. A light joke floats into your mind. Cleopatra scanning Octavian's speeches and muttering, "Wow, he really woke up today and chose fiction." Another joke follows as you picture Octavian practicing his tragic outrage face in the mirror. And a final joke nudges through as you imagine Cleopatra telling her advisors, "Well, at least I'm trending." But beneath the humor, Cleopatra feels the gravity. She knows propaganda in Rome is not mere gossip, it is weaponry. Octavian shapes public opinion the way sculptors shape marble, with precision, pressure, and a willingness to discard anything that cracks. In his version of the story, Antony is no longer a Roman general. He is Cleopatra's puppet, her victim, her prisoner, a foolish lover ensnared by her perfumes and feasts. Octavian frames Cleopatra as a threat to Roman virtue, Roman values, and Roman destiny. He claims she wants to rule Rome from Alexandria, to turn the Roman Empire into a foreign monarchy, to replace good Roman wives with an Egyptian queen who dares to wield power openly. You can almost hear Roman matrons clutching their pearls across the city. And Antony? He tries to push back. He writes letters, he sends envoys. He insists his loyalty is to Rome, not to Cleopatra. But the Senate listens to Octavian. The crowds listen to Octavian. The legions begin to lean toward Octavian. Cleopatra senses the danger tightening around Antony like a vice. So you follow her into the palace war room, a vast hall, painted with celestial maps, where incense coils like smoke around bronze sculptures of falcons and lions. Cleopatra stands before a massive table covered in scrolls, ship's logs, regional maps, taxation reports, and diplomatic letters. She is calm, focused, determined, a queen preparing for the worst. Historians still debate whether she and Antony considered relocating the Roman capital to Alexandria. Some sources insist they dreamed of ruling a bicontinental empire. Others argue it was propaganda invented by Octavian. But watching Cleopatra here, you understand something deeper. She wants security for Egypt, for her dynasty, for Caesarion. Rome will not offer that. Not now, not ever. So she builds her strength quietly. She increases grain exports to key allies. She shores up Egypt's defensive borders. She calls upon Arabian cavalry, Cypriot sailors, and local militias. She orders more ships sleek, fast, with reinforced rams. Meanwhile, Antony returns to Alexandria, his face etched with frustration, realization, and a flicker of fear he tries to hide. Octavian has outmaneuvered him in the court of public opinion, and public opinion in Rome, as Cleopatra understands far too well, can topple empires. Their reunion is quiet, not like their earlier nights filled with laughter and wine, but steady, loyal, resolute. You watch Cleopatra take Antony's hand gently, as if grounding him, reminding him who stands with him when Rome turns cold. Then comes the political earthquake. Octavian reads Antony's alleged will aloud to the Senate, a document claiming Antony wanted to be buried in Alexandria with Cleopatra, that he recognized Caesarion as Caesar's true heir, and that he planned to give Roman territories to Cleopatra's children. Historians still argue whether the will was genuine, altered, or entirely fabricated, but its impact was catastrophic. Rome erupts, senators cry treason, crowds shout for war, and Octavian, savoring the moment, declares Cleopatra not Antony, the true enemy of Rome, not a Roman traitor, a foreign one. That distinction is lethal. The Senate votes to declare war not on Antony, but on Cleopatra. Octavian's genius lies in that choice. Roman citizens may tolerate civil war, but a war against a foreign queen threatening Rome's purity, that's an easy sell. News reaches Cleopatra in the palace. You feel the silence stretch in the room around her. Advisors glance at one another nervously. Servants bow lower than usual. Antony grips the edge of a table until his knuckles whiten. Cleopatra inhales slowly, deeply. And then she nods. War is coming. Not a palace intrigue, not a border skirmish. A world-shaping, empire-defining, history-shattering war. The looming shadow of Rome stretches across the Mediterranean. The weight of destiny presses on Egypt's shores. And the queen, standing in her palace with torches flickering behind her, seems almost serene. Because Cleopatra has faced betrayal before. She has faced exile. She has faced civil war. She will face this too. Tonight, you stand beside her on the balcony overlooking the darkened harbour, as the Nile glimmers like a silver serpent. The breeze carries the scent of incense and danger. Octavian sharpens his knives. Antony steels himself for battle. Cleopatra gathers her fleets, and the world inches closer to one of the most famous conflicts in history. A conflict that will decide kings, kingdoms, love, loyalty, and the fate of two of the ancient world's brightest stars. You feel Alexandria holding its breath as Cleopatra steps into the palace war chamber, her movements smooth but purposeful, like someone gliding across the surface of a storm she already knows is coming. The Mediterranean light spills through the windows, illuminating maps pinned with bronze pegs, rows of sealed scrolls, and a gathering of advisors who look as though they haven't slept in days. War isn't a rumor now, or a whisper, or even a political threat. It's real, it's official, and it's marching straight toward Egypt. The mainstream historical fact cuts cleanly through the tension. By 32 BCE, Octavian and the Roman Senate had formally declared war on Cleopatra, naming her, not Antony, as the enemy of Rome. The quirky tidbit? Some ancient Roman satirists claimed that during the Senate debate, one senator dramatically fainted after hearing Cleopatra called her Witch of the Nile. Historians still argue whether that melodramatic collapse was real or just theatre, but it certainly captures the energy of Octavian's propaganda machine. You move with Cleopatra as she crosses the room. Her gold jewelry makes a faint chiming sound, an accidental music that almost covers the thrum of dread beneath the table. Antony stands beside her, every inch the seasoned general, but even he looks weary at the thought of facing Rome's full might under Octavian's command. A soft joke touches your mind, Cleopatra glancing at the war declarations and muttering, "Great, Rome's having another crisis, and somehow it's my fault again." Another joke drifts in as you picture Octavian's face on wanted posters of Cleopatra, complete with dramatic shading. And one final joke arrives as you imagine Cleopatra reading Roman propaganda that claims she can control the weather and thinking, I mean, that would be useful, but no. Yet beneath the humor, the danger is very real. Octavian is not like Caesar, not like Antony, not like the senators who plot in whispers. Octavian is sharp, cold, patient. He waits for moments like a hunter waits for footprints in the dust. And Cleopatra knows it. You follow her through the palace library where scholars spread out star charts alongside naval blueprints. She studies every detail, currents, winds, supply routes, strongholds. Egypt has resources, but Rome has legions. Rome has alliances. Rome has numbers that stack like stone blocks. But Cleopatra isn't intimidated. She has survived worse with less. She sits with Antony long into the night, the glow of oil lamps warming the room as servants bring trays of figs and warm bread. They debate strategy. Should they fight at sea or on land? Should they defend Alexandria or confront Rome earlier? Should they divide forces or combine them? Historians still debate who pushed harder for a naval battle, Antony or Cleopatra. Some say Cleopatra insisted, trusting Egypt's naval strength. Others argue Antony wanted to display dominance on the waves. But walking beside them here, you sense something more nuanced. Neither of them can risk fighting Rome on Roman soil. They need the sea. Cleopatra's fleet is one of the strongest in the Mediterranean. Her ships are enormous, massive quinqueremes with towers built for archers. Her captains are seasoned. Her sailors know every trick of the currents. Antony agrees, and a battle plan begins to form. Alexandria buzzes with preparation. You move through the bustling shipyards where craftsmen hammer iron, polish bronze, mend sails, and test oars. The smell of tar and cedar fills your lungs. Cleopatra walks among them, not from a distance, not from a balcony, but up close, inspecting ships, speaking with captains, understanding the heartbeat of her navy. At night, she walks alone along the harbour wall, waves splashing below as she watches the moonlight paint the sea. Her thoughts are quiet but heavy. She's fighting not just for her throne, not just for her children, but for the future of Egypt itself. If Rome wins, Egypt becomes a province. If Rome wins, Caesarion's fate becomes a warning to all future heirs. You sense the tension in Antony too. Cleopatra stands steady as a stone obelisk, but Antony is fraying. Messages from Rome arrive like poisoned darts, each one describing Octavian's latest accusations. Antony abandoned Rome. Antony betrayed his wife for a foreign queen. Antony intends to crown Cleopatra Queen of Rome. Antony knows these claims are lies or twisted truths, but Roman crowds believe them. Octavian is building a narrative where Antony is already dead. The war will just make it official. One evening, you stand beside Cleopatra in the Hall of Maps, while Antony paces in front of her, his voice tight with frustration. "They think I'm nothing but her puppet," he snaps. Cleopatra raises an eyebrow. "Then show them otherwise." "And how do I do that when everything I do is twisted?" "You stop responding to Octavian," she says calmly. "You respond to the battlefield." Her logic cuts through the fog in Antony's mind, but the mood shifts when reports arrive from Greece. Octavian's general Agrippa is moving quickly. He's brilliant, disciplined, relentless. You watch Antony's face drain. He has fought great generals, but Agrippa is something else, a strategist who can outmaneuver entire fleets with quiet precision. Still, Antony and Cleopatra decide to take the fight west. They relocate their combined forces to Greece, choosing Actium as their staging ground. It's a risky choice, a bay with narrow waters, difficult winds, and limited room for maneuvering. As their forces assemble, thousands of Egyptian sailors, Roman veterans, Greek mercenaries, and local militias swarm the coast. The sound of campfires crackling and soldiers training fills the humid air. Cleopatra oversees supply lines, ensuring her troops are fed, her ships stocked, her officers ready. Antony gives rousing speeches, fists clenched, eyes blazing with determination, but you can feel the undertow of dread. Their alliance is strong, but Octavian's momentum is stronger. Historians still argue why Antony and Cleopatra didn't retreat sooner, why they didn't force a land battle, why they didn't choose a more favorable location. But watching them here under the Actium sun, you sense the real reason. To retreat is to concede the future. Cleopatra refuses to let Egypt become a footnote in Rome's story. Antony refuses to return to Rome under Octavian's shadow. So they stay. They build. They prepare. And the Mediterranean wind stiffens, carrying the scent of an approaching storm. Tonight, as you walk past Cleopatra's tent, you hear silence inside. Not fear, not despair, just thought. Cleopatra is studying the tides, studying her future, studying the moment when everything she has built will be tested in one decisive clash. Actium is coming, and the world is about to spin on the edge of a blade. You stand on a cliff overlooking the Ionian Sea, dawn creeping slowly over the horizon like a hesitant hand brushing color onto the world. Below you lies the Bay of Actium, quiet now, deceptively beautiful. The kind of place where fishermen should be hauling nets and arguing about the weather. Instead, hundreds of warships crowd the water like restless beasts, their oars tucked in, their masts rising in jagged rows. The air feels tight, almost metallic. Something world-shifting is about to happen here, and Cleopatra can feel it in her bones. The mainstream historical fact is as sharp as a spear point. On September 2, 31 BCE, the forces of Mark Antony and Cleopatra faced Octavian's fleets in the Battle of Actium, a naval clash that would determine the fate of 3 continents. The quirky tidbit? Some ancient sources claim Cleopatra's flagship was so luxurious gold-tipped prow, purple sails, silver oars, that Roman sailors could spot it instantly. Historians still argue whether this was exaggeration or envy masquerading as commentary. But it certainly fits Cleopatra's style. Political power wrapped in spectacle. You move through the camp as tension pulls at every tent flap and armor strap. Soldiers eat in silence. Officers whisper over maps. The smell of salt, sweat, and oil fills the air. Antony paces like a trapped lion, agitated, overthinking, second-guessing. Cleopatra, however, stands calm, her eyes narrowed against the sunrise like she's trying to read. Fate in the shifting bands of gold. A soft joke drifts through your thoughts. Cleopatra looking out at the sea and thinking, if the gods love me, they'll send wind. If they really love me, they'll sink Octavian's flagship right now. Another joke follows as you imagine Antony trying to give a motivational speech and accidentally insulting the weather. And the final joke slips in when you picture a sailor staring at Cleopatra's ship and muttering, I'm not rowing that thing into battle, it looks too expensive to scratch. But beneath the humor, dread coils through every heartbeat. Because this isn't just a battle, it's the pivot of Cleopatra's entire future, her dynasty, her children, her claim to power. Everything lies coiled in the balance. The night before the battle, you follow Cleopatra and Antony into their war tent. A single oil lamp flickers, casting wavering shadows across their faces. They're rehearsing maneuvers, reviewing supply lists, arguing about fleet formations. Antony wants aggression, he always does. Cleopatra wants strategy, she always does. She warns him that Agrippa, Octavian's admiral, is too skilled to underestimate. Antony shakes his head. Pride or desperation, you're not sure which pushes him to dismiss her advice. Historians still debate who made the final call on the fleet's formation. Some blame Cleopatra, some blame Antony, some blame the weather. But standing here, you can sense the truth. Both of them are making decisions under pressure so intense it bends their judgment. Dawn breaks, the trumpets sound, the water shivers with movement. You board Cleopatra's flagship with her long, sleek, reinforced, more floating palace than ship of war. Oars dip in unison, slicing through the water with smooth, practiced rhythm. Cleopatra stands at the stern, gold catching the morning light, eyes unwavering. She's not ornamental. She's part of the war council, part of the command, part of the decision. Antony's forces push forward in tight formation. But Octavian's fleet doesn't charge. It waits. Agrippa knows the winds, knows the currents, knows that Antony's larger ships will struggle to maneuver. And slowly, terrifyingly, Antony's ships begin drifting out of position. The battle ignites. Arrows darken the sky. Ships ram one another with thunderous cracks. Oars snap like bones. Men shout, scream, fall into the boiling sea. Cleopatra watches, heart pounding, measuring every shift, every surge. She sees Antony's line falter. She sees Agrippa's trap tightening. She sees that they are being pulled into the jaws of defeat. Historians still argue whether Cleopatra panicked or calculated what came next. But you, standing beside her, feel the shift in her breath. She recognizes that this battle is unwinnable. Not because Antony is weak, not because her forces are incompetent, but because Octavian played a long game, and today, he wins. Out on the water, Antony's flagship is in chaos. Smoke rises, sailors shout, officers scramble. He looks toward Cleopatra's ship, searching for answers, for reassurance. And then it happens. Cleopatra raises her signal. Her flagship turns, her fleet follows. Dozens of Egyptian ships pull back, unfurling sails, turning south toward open water. Antony sees the movement. You feel his heart plummet. He leaves his flagship, abandons the fight, jumps into a smaller vessel, and follows Cleopatra's retreating fleet. Thousands watch their leader flee. Morale collapses. Octavian descends like a hawk. The battle is lost. History seals itself closed around this moment like a fist. Cleopatra stands on her deck as the coastline of Actium fades behind a curtain of smoke. Her hands grip the rail tightly. Her face is unreadable, pain, resolve, calculation, blending into one expression. Antony boards her ship moments later, breathless, furious, devastated. They argue, voices low but sharp. You can't hear the words, but you hear the grief in them. The disbelief, the heartbreak. The reality check sinks in. Cleopatra didn't run away from battle. She retreated to save her navy, to save Antony, to save Egypt. But that retreat will become the myth that defines her. Historians still argue who abandoned whom, whether Cleopatra's retreat doomed Antony, or whether Antony's panic doomed them both. But tonight, on this ship cutting through dark waves, you see two rulers facing the bitter truth. Actium has decided everything. Rome will come for them next. Octavian will not rest until their crowns and their lives are crushed beneath his heel. Cleopatra looks south toward Egypt. Antony looks at the floor. And you feel the world shift, unsteady and irreversible. Tonight, the sea is quiet. Tomorrow, the end begins. You arrive with Cleopatra and Antony back in Alexandria, beneath a sky that feels heavier than it used to, as if even the gods are holding their breath. The journey from Actium has been long, bruising, and echoing with silence, an uncomfortable, hollow kind that sits between two people who know their world has changed forever. The palace rises from the shoreline as radiant as ever, but something in its light feels dimmed, as though the marble itself senses defeat coming in slow steps. The mainstream historical fact sets the stage. After their catastrophic loss at Actium in 31 BCE, Antony and Cleopatra retreated to Alexandria, trying to rebuild their strength while Octavian closed in. The quirky tidbit? Ancient sources say Antony took to living in a small retreat on the palace grounds that Cleopatra jokingly called the Timon Room, because he paced around complaining like the tragic philosopher Timon of Athens, who hated the entire world. Historians still argue whether Antony was truly brooding non-stop or whether Roman writers exaggerated his sulking for dramatic effect, but right now you can almost feel the gloom in the walls. You walk through the palace corridors with Cleopatra, your footsteps echoing faintly. Servants bow deeply, but their eyes flicker with worry. Messages arrive, hourly scrolled warnings, reports from spies, letters sealed with trembling wax. Octavian is consolidating support. His legions grow. The Mediterranean's trade routes shift under his control. Cleopatra's allies shrink away, not out of disloyalty, but out of fear. A soft joke taps your thoughts, Cleopatra looking at a stack of bad news and muttering, "Ah yes, another cheerful update." Another joke follows, imagining Antony scribbling dramatic poetry in his so-called Timon Room. And a last joke drifts in as you picture Cleopatra instructing her scribes, if Octavian sends one more smug letter, just mark it as spam. But beneath the humor, Alexandria's mood is changing. Cleopatra knows that a queen doesn't get to collapse, not even in private. Not even now. She moves through her responsibilities with iron steadiness, reviewing grain reserves, allocating funds for troops, strengthening walls, consulting generals, securing her children's safety, preparing escape routes. Every action she takes feels deliberate, precise, focused. She is fighting a losing battle, but she refuses to fight it carelessly. You follow her into the palace nursery, where Caesarion and her younger children play with tutors. She watches them with a softness she rarely reveals, her eyes glimmering with fierce protectiveness. Those children are the dynasty she's fought for through exile, war, alliances, and heartbreak. And now that dynasty is cornered, historians still debate whether Cleopatra truly believed Egypt could survive Octavian's advance, or whether she was simply buying time for her children to escape. But walking beside her now, you sense both. She is strategizing, but she is also loving, and both instincts burn equally bright in her chest. Outside, the city begins to prepare itself just in case. Shops sell supplies earlier in the day. Fishermen cast nets at dawn instead of noon. Builders reinforce walls. Priests conduct rituals to appease the gods. Even the Pharos lighthouse feels like it's watching the horizon for Roman sails. And Antony? He drifts deeper into despair. You find him practicing with soldiers one day, sweating, shouting, swinging a sword with a fury that borders on desperation. But then, hours later, you find him alone on a terrace, staring into nothing, hands trembling slightly. Antony has always been larger than life, a force of nature, a man whose confidence can fill an entire room. But defeat has hollowed him. Octavian's propaganda, Rome's judgment, the collapse of his legions, these blows cut deeper than any blade. He starts drinking more, training less, thinking too much, sleeping too little. Cleopatra sees it. She feels it. She tries to pull him back politically, emotionally, mentally. But Antony is at war with himself now, and that is a war Cleopatra cannot win for him. Still, she does not abandon him. You accompany the two of them into the war hall where advisors assemble. Cleopatra takes her seat as queen, straight-backed, regal, composed, while Antony sits beside her, quieter than usual. They listen to reports. Octavian's fleet is approaching. Agrippa controls the sea. Rome's legions march steadily south. Their generals suggest a retreat into Upper Egypt. Others propose negotiating with Octavian. Others suggest waiting behind Alexandria's strong walls. Cleopatra dismisses none of them. She listens carefully to every voice. Historians still argue whether Cleopatra genuinely believed Antony could recover, or whether she was already preparing to negotiate alone. But here, in this room, you sense a woman trying to keep all paths open. Yet each day, the circle tightens. One afternoon, Cleopatra walks along the palace roof with you beside her. The Mediterranean glitters at the horizon, deceptively calm. She squints against the sun, scanning for enemy sails even though she knows it's too early. Her lips tighten, her fingers grip the railing. She is calculating escape routes, last stands, diplomatic tricks, last-minute alliances, everything. A gust of wind brings the scent of jasmine. The moment almost feels peaceful, but then a messenger rushes up the stairs, breathless, eyes wide. Octavian is near Cyprus. Supplies are intercepted. Egypt's allies have defected. The war is no longer coming, it is at the door. Later that night, Cleopatra convenes her advisors again. Torches flicker. Soldiers stand at attention. Antony sits beside her, silent but alert. She orders the harbour fortified, the navy positioned, the palace secured. Her decisions are rattling with urgency now, but not panic. Cleopatra has never panicked. You sense her making a final, internal list. If they win, Egypt remains free. If they lose, her children must escape. If Antony crumbles, she must remain the anchor. But deep inside, Cleopatra knows something unspoken. Actium was the war. Everything after is aftermath. Historians still debate what Cleopatra hoped for in these final preparations, but right now, you can feel it in her movements. She hasn't surrendered. She hasn't given up. She is preparing for both victory and the worst-case outcome in the same breath. One last deep breath fills the palace. One last quiet night settles over Alexandria. One last fragile hope glimmers in the halls. Because tomorrow, or the next day, or the one after, the Roman eagle will appear on the horizon, and Cleopatra and Antony will have no choice but to face their fate inside the city that has always been both their home and their battlefield. The storm is nearly here. And Alexandria waits. You wake to a heavy stillness rolling over Alexandria like a shroud. The sun hasn't yet risen, but the palace hums with a low, anxious energy, guards shifting at their posts, courtiers whispering in corners, scribes clutching scrolls with trembling fingers. Something has changed. Something is closing in. The Mediterranean breeze carries a faint, unfamiliar scent. Roman campfire smoke drifting from ships still too distant to see. Cleopatra feels it before anyone else. She steps onto the balcony you've walked 1,000 times with her. linen robes fluttering around her in the dim blue light. Her jaw tightens as she stares out toward the sea. She doesn't need a messenger to speak the truth. Rome is here. The mainstream historical fact makes the air colder. In 30 BCE, as Octavian marched on Alexandria, Cleopatra attempted a final round of negotiations, trying desperately to preserve Egypt's sovereignty and her children's future. But here's the quirky tidbit. One ancient source claims Cleopatra tried sending Octavian a letter written in Egyptian, assuming he wouldn't recognize the hieroglyphs, a diplomatic version of test the waters, but keep plausible deniability. Historians still argue whether that anecdote is true, but it absolutely matches her clever, layered communication style. You follow Cleopatra as she walks through the palace's central hall, the torches burning faintly like nervous hearts. Antony is awake too, pacing in a side room with the twitchy, wounded energy of a trapped lion. His armor is unpolished, his eyes are red-rimmed, his pride is broken in places Cleopatra cannot mend. A soft joke flickers into your mind. Cleopatra glancing at Octavian's advancing legions and muttering, "Didn't even send a heads-up scroll. Rude." Another joke nudges in as you imagine Antony telling soldiers, "It's fine, we've survived worse," while everyone else thinks, "No sir, we absolutely have not." And one last joke drifts through as Cleopatra snaps at a servant, "If Octavian sends one more guilt trip message, delete it." But beneath the humor, the crisis is sharp as shattered obsidian. Cleopatra begins her final maneuver, diplomacy. She orders scribes to prepare letters carefully phrased, subtly crafted, sealed with her personal insignia. Letters offering surrender negotiations. Letters requesting mercy for her children. Letters implying she might even send Caesarion away forever if it meant sparing Egypt further devastation. You stand beside her as she dictates, her voice low but steady, each word chosen with surgical precision. She knows Octavian's mind, cold, calculating, rigid. She also knows his insecurities. She threads her message with respect, flattery, and subtle reminders of Egypt's importance as Rome's grain supplier. Historians still debate whether Cleopatra truly believed Octavian would negotiate, or whether she was simply buying time for a backup plan. But walking here with her in the lamplight, you sense another truth. She is trying to save lives, not her throne, not her legacy, not her pride, her people, her children, even Antony, despite everything. Yet, as the ink dries, a messenger returns with ice in his eyes. Octavian refuses clementia. He refuses negotiation. He refuses compromise. He wants Cleopatra alive and paraded in chains through Rome. He wants Antony dead. He wants Caesarion erased. He wants Egypt. Cleopatra grips the edge of the table hard enough to whiten her knuckles, but her voice does not tremble. Antony, however, hears the news like a blow to the gut. His shoulders slump, his gaze drops. He turns away from the hall. Later that night, you follow Cleopatra to the palace's inner garden, a sanctuary of soft lanterns, blooming lotus, and pools still as polished bronze. She kneels beside a fountain, fingers trailing through the water. Her reflection warps in the ripples. She whispers something you can barely make out. There must still be a way. That way is dangerous, and it involves more deception. Cleopatra considers a dramatic gesture, one that historians still debate fiercely. Some sources say she threatened to burn her treasure to keep it from falling into Roman hands. Others say she secretly moved some of it to hidden vaults. And still, others argue she planned to fake her own death, to manipulate Octavian. You feel her working through options at lightning speed. Surrendering to Octavian? Impossible. Fleeing by sea? Already too late. Negotiating through allies? None left. Appealing to Octavian's ambition? Risky, but possible. Appealing to Octavian's vanity? More promising. Appealing to Octavian personally? The last gambit. Late that night, she sends one more message, this time private, direct, and carefully crafted. She offers Octavian not Egypt, not submission, but information. She implies Antony is losing control. She hints she might separate herself politically from him. She suggests she could surrender peacefully if treated as a monarch rather than a spoil of war. It's a bold move, dangerous, morally tangled. But Cleopatra is fighting for survival, and survival rarely looks noble on the surface. The next morning, Octavian responds, but his reply isn't kindness. It's a subtle trap. He says he will negotiate only with Cleopatra alone. No Antony, no witnesses, no conditions. You feel Cleopatra's stomach tighten. She knows what that means. This isn't a negotiation, it's a capture attempt. So she prepares another plan. She withdraws into her mausoleum, an enormous, beautiful tomb she's been constructing for years. Some say she built it merely to honor tradition. Others say she built it because she always sensed her reign might end violently. Inside, she gathers her treasures, gold, jewels, manuscript collections, anything she doesn't want Octavian to seize. Then she sends word to Antony. She has died. The lie is a dagger, and she knows it. But she's out of moves. Except one. Historians still argue whether her intention was to rally Antony back into battle or force him to flee so she could negotiate alone. But tonight, watching her in the dim torchlight of her own tomb, you see the truth. She is trying to stop Antony from being dragged through Rome like a trophy, and she is preparing for the final turn of fate, the moment when she must face Octavian directly. The walls of the mausoleum glow with flickering light. Cleopatra's breathing steadies, her eyes bright, calculating, alive with defiance fix on the sealed doors. She is not defeated yet, but the end is closing in like a rising tide. And tomorrow, everything will break. You stand inside Cleopatra's mausoleum, the torchlight shivering along walls carved with lotus blossoms and soaring falcon wings, as the Queen of Egypt waits still, poised, and terrifyingly calm. Outside, the air vibrates with tension. Inside, Cleopatra's breath moves slow, as drifting incense. She has sent the message, the fatal lie that she is dead. And now she waits for the ripple it will unleash inside Antony's battered spirit. The mainstream historical fact strikes like a blade. When Antony heard Cleopatra was dead, he attempted to take his own life, falling on his sword. But the quirky tidbit? One ancient source claims Antony asked a loyal servant to deliver the blow for him, only for the servant to panic and cry so loudly that Antony ended up comforting him instead. Historians still argue whether that detail is true or just gallows humor from Roman storytellers. But the emotional chaos in those moments feels painfully believable. You move with Cleopatra as she stands in the center of the tomb, hands clasped lightly, face lit by the flicker of gold and shadow. Her plan has begun. She intends to separate herself from Antony long enough to negotiate with Octavian. She intends to keep Antony from suffering humiliation. She intends to find a sliver of escape from the tightening noose. But the message lands too sharply, too deeply, too disastrously. A messenger bursts into the mausoleum, panting, sweat-soaked, eyes filled with panic. Antony has stabbed himself. The words strike Cleopatra like a meteor. For a heartbeat, she freezes, then all the composure she has held for days fractures into raw urgency. You run with her through the narrow corridors, lanterns trembling as she passes, servants scrambling aside. Her sandals slap stone. Her heartbeat thrums like war drums in your chest. When she reaches the palace courtyard, chaos is breaking like a storm. Soldiers shout. Women wail. Antony's companions kneel beside a half-collapsed figure drenched in blood. The sight hits Cleopatra with such force that she grips a pillar to steady herself. Antony is alive, but fading. He is pale. He is shaking. He is broken. And he is calling her name. They try to carry him to the mausoleum, but the entrance is too narrow for a stretcher, so Cleopatra orders something that becomes one of the most haunting scenes in ancient history. She has Antony lifted by rope and hoisted through a window of the tomb, his body swinging weakly as soldiers push from below and servants pull from above. You help steady Antony as he's pulled across the ledge into Cleopatra's arms. Her linen sleeves stain red instantly. Antony gasps, eyes meeting hers, and the weight of their years together, war, love, ambition, madness settles between them like dust. A soft, trembling joke pushes into your mind. Antony whispering, "I told you I'd come back, even now." Another joke flickers Cleopatra, muttering, "This is not how I wanted you to visit." And a final, broken joke drifts in. Antony attempting to say something heroic, but only managing, "So, this didn't go to plan." But beneath the humor is agony. Cleopatra lowers him gently onto a pallet inside the tomb, cradling his head, brushing sweat from his brow. His breath rattles. His eyes wander, unfocused, then snap back to hers, as though he refuses to die without seeing her clearly. "Queen of Egypt," he murmurs, "do not weep. I did. All I could." His voice is thick with blood and regret, and Cleopatra, who has held steel in her spine for years, finally lets the tears fall. She tells him he is not defeated. She tells him Rome will remember him. She tells him their story mattered. Historians still debate Antony's final words. Some say he begged her to trust no one. Others say he apologized for Actium. Others claim he asked to be buried beside her. But in the silence of this torchlit tomb, you can feel the truth. Antony dies with Cleopatra's hands on his face, her breath against his cheek, her grief mixing with his fading strength. Then, his chest stills, his eyes glaze, his body goes slack. Cleopatra closes his eyes with trembling fingers. She kisses his forehead. She does not scream. She does not collapse. Her grief is silent, dignified, devastating. The queen rises. Antony is gone. Rome is at the gate. And she has only one path left to negotiate with: Octavian face to face. You walk with her as she washes Antony's blood from her hands, her expression hardening into regal serenity. She orders him embalmed with royal honors. She commands the palace to quiet its mourning until the political battlefield is clear. Then she sends word. She will meet Octavian. Octavian enters the palace like a shadow made flesh, controlled, unreadable, cold. He walks into Cleopatra's presence without bowing, without smiling, without even pretending to mourn Antony. Cleopatra stands before him dressed in her finest mourning robes, gold gleaming like fire in the torchlight. She is regal. She is composed. She is negotiating with the man who has already decided her fate. She offers him wealth. She offers him alliances. She offers her crown. She does not offer herself, and she does not offer Caesarion. She watches Octavian's face carefully. His eyes give nothing away. He promises her safety. He promises her mercy. But Cleopatra has survived too many courts to believe him. She knows he needs just one thing from her: a living trophy, a queen paraded through Rome in chains, proof of his victory. The negotiations end without clarity. Cleopatra returns to her tomb that night. You feel the storm inside her. Fury, fear, grief, resolve. Historians still debate whether Cleopatra planned her next move in that moment, or whether it formed slowly across hours of weighing impossible choices. But you see her realize something here in the quiet, perfumed air. She will not be paraded. She will not be conquered alive. And she will not let Octavian write the final line of her story. The torches flicker. The air thickens. And Cleopatra, last queen of Egypt, prepares for the only escape left to her. You stand with Cleopatra in the dim, perfumed darkness of her mausoleum, the air thick with incense and fate. Antony is gone. His body lies wrapped in linen nearby, honored with royal rites but surrounded by a silence so deep it presses against your ribs. Cleopatra moves like a shadow, slow, deliberate, her mind racing faster than her footsteps. The world is closing in, tightening around her like a snare, and she knows there is only one final move left to play. The mainstream historical fact cuts through the quiet. In August 30 BCE, Cleopatra chose to end her life, rather than be paraded through Rome as a prisoner in Octavian's triumph. The quirky tidbit? Ancient writers argued over how she died. Some swore it was an asp, hidden in a basket of figs. Others claimed she used poison, and one even insisted she kept multiple small, venomous snakes in a decorated box like a macabre jewelry case. Historians still argue over which version is real, but they all agree on the essence. Cleopatra engineered her own exit with the same control she used to shape her life. You watch her walk slowly past the tomb walls, her fingers brushing over painted lotus blossoms, over hieroglyphic prayers carved for pharaohs who faced judgment before the gods. Her grief is a silent weight, hanging from her shoulders like a heavy cloak, but beneath it, a fierce clarity glows. She will choose her ending. Not Octavian, not Rome, her. A gentle, bittersweet joke flutters through your thoughts, Cleopatra whispering to herself. If Octavian thinks he can use me as decor in his parade, he's tragically misinformed. Another joke follows as you imagine her rolling her eyes at Roman gossip. Seductive sorceress? Honestly, give me a little credit. I do more political strategy before breakfast than they do in a year. And one final joke drifts in when you picture her raising an eyebrow and muttering, "Snakes? Sure. Rome's been slithering around me for years." But beneath the humour is a queen preparing for her last negotiation, the one that will happen not with Rome, but with death. You walk with her as she meets Octavian again, this time in her private audience chamber. She stands in black linen trimmed with gold. Her hair is braided with lapis beads. Makeup is minimal, only the faintest kohl outlining eyes that have outlasted countless betrayals. Octavian enters with the confidence of a man who thinks he has already won. His smile is polite, thin, and cold. He studies Cleopatra like a rare artifact he intends to display. He promises mercy. He promises safety. He promises dignity. But his tone betrays him. Cleopatra listens, expression unreadable, but her heart is already withdrawing. She knows these are lies wrapped in silk. She has heard these tones before from Ptolemy XIII's counselors, from Roman senators who loathed her, from diplomats who smiled while plotting her fall. Octavian makes one final reveal. He has captured Caesarion. He might spare the younger, children. He intends to take Cleopatra alive. You feel the moment her hope fractures not for herself, but for her eldest son. Caesarion, child of Julius Caesar, rightful heir in her eyes, symbol of her dynasty, and now a direct threat to Octavian's claim to power. Historians still debate whether Cleopatra realized Caesarion's fate was already sealed, or whether she still believed she could bargain for him. But here, in this room filled with torchlight and tension, you sense her heart breaking beneath her calm exterior. Octavian leaves, convinced she is beaten. He underestimates her, fatally. Cleopatra returns to her mausoleum. She closes the doors. She calls only her most loyal servants. Inside, the world goes still. You watch her remove her jewelry piece by piece, laying each item on a platform: gold, lapis, pearls, the symbols of her reign. She runs her fingers through Caesarion's childhood toys, small wooden animals carved by palace craftsmen. She presses a hand to a painted mural of Isis, whispering prayers older than empires. She prepares herself not as a queen in danger, but as a queen meeting the gods. Historians still argue over the exact method of her death, but here in this room, the moment unfolds with eerie, sacred precision. A basket arrives, figs piled on top, something hidden beneath the leaves. A guard brings a small vial of toxin as a second option. Cleopatra studies both with the calm of someone choosing her crown. She sits on a gilded couch. She breathes deeply. She calls for her two closest attendants, Charmian and Eras. Then she speaks one final command. When the moment comes, do not fear. Follow me. You watch Eras collapse in tears. Charmian nods, heartbroken but resolute. Cleopatra reaches into the basket. A rustle. A hiss. A shape moving beneath figs. She lifts her arm, extending her hand like a priestess offering herself to fate. A sting. A tremor. A slow, spreading cold. Her breath hitches, but she does not scream. Her eyes drift half-closed, serene. Eras begins to sway, poison taking her. Charmian adjusts Cleopatra's crown one last time and whispers, "Was this well done?" And Cleopatra, her voice fading, answers with her silence. Her body relaxes, her pulse slows, her head tilts gently to the side. The Queen of Egypt is gone, the last pharaoh, the last sovereign breath of a 3,000-year dynasty. You feel the world fall quiet. Even the torches seem to bow. Outside, Octavian learns the news and stiffens not in triumph, but in frustration. He cannot parade a dead queen. He cannot bend her to Rome's spectacle. He cannot possess her legacy. She chose her ending. She won one final victory. Cleopatra's story is not finished. There is still one chapter, one last echo through history. But tonight, you stand in the stillness of her tomb, watching the torchlight tremble over her peaceful face, knowing the world will never forget the queen who refused to bow. You stand in the silent aftermath of Cleopatra's passing, the air inside her mausoleum still thick with incense and the fading heat of torches. Outside, Alexandria trembles under the weight of a destiny reshaped. The queen is gone. Antony is gone. The war is over. And the world, stunned, breathless, begins to understand that an entire era has slipped quietly into legend. The mainstream historical fact rises like a pillar in the stillness. With Cleopatra's death in 30 BCE, Egypt fell under Roman control, officially ending the 3,000-year rule of the pharaohs. But here's the quirky tidbit: when Octavian entered Alexandria after her death, an eyewitness claimed he gazed at her body and said she looked noble even in death, which is Roman for, "She still managed to steal the scene I wanted for myself." Historians still argue whether Octavian truly admired her, or simply recognized that she had beaten him in the one way he couldn't control. She chose her own ending. You walk through the palace with Octavian's soldiers now patrolling halls that once echoed with Cleopatra's laughter and Antony's booming voice, statues draped in mourning cloth, servants moving silently, visibly trying not to crumble. The scent of lotus and myrrh floats through the corridors like a memory refusing to fade. But Cleopatra's story is not finished, not here, not now, not ever. You follow Octavian as he enters the mausoleum. Cleopatra's attendants lie near her Charmian and eras loyal to the last heartbeat. Cleopatra herself is arranged with regal precision, golden crown gleaming softly atop her still brow. Even in death, she looks composed, majestic, untouchable. A soft joke flickers through your thoughts. Cleopatra lying there thinking, "Not in your parade, Octavian." Another joke follows, imagining Roman soldiers whispering, "She still looks like she's judging us." And a final joke nudges in. Octavian staring at her body and thinking, "Well, this is inconvenient." But beneath the humor, a deeper truth settles. Cleopatra's power didn't end when her heartbeat stopped. It began echoing across centuries, across continents, across the imagination of every generation to come. You step outside with Octavian as he orders Caesariion's execution, a decision he makes with chilling efficiency. Cleopatra's dream of her son continuing the Ptolemaic line ends abruptly at the hands of Rome's new master. But her younger children, with Antony Alexander Helios, Cleopatra Selene, and little Ptolemy Philadelphus, are spared. Sent to Rome. Raised in Octavian's sister's household, their futures uncertain, but their lives preserved. And Rome, having swallowed Egypt, swells with pride. Gold floods its treasuries. Grain stabilizes its markets. Octavian becomes Augustus Rome's first emperor. But the strange part? Despite all of his victories, Cleopatra becomes the one whose story survives brightest. You walk with Alexandria's people as they mourn not just a queen, but an idea. A symbol. A woman who stood against an empire with nothing but her mind, her courage, and her unbreakable will. Priests conduct rituals for her spirit, scholars record her deeds, mothers whisper her name to daughters, and even Rome, for all its slander, cannot erase her completely. Historians still argue whether Cleopatra was an ambitious tyrant, a brilliant ruler, a manipulative seductress, or a misunderstood strategist. But you, having travelled her entire life beside her, know the truth is far richer, far deeper, and far more human. She was a survivor, a visionary, a linguist, a diplomat, a mother, a queen, a woman who held the fate of empires in her hands and dared to shape them. Her legacy becomes unstoppable. Artists paint her, poets praise her, playwrights dramatize her, historians debate her, empires claim her. And through it all, Cleopatra's myth grows larger, not smaller with time. Tonight, you walk through the faded glow of Alexandria's harbour as waves lap against the stone, the pharaoh's lighthouse burning steadily in the distance. The city feels quieter, older, but not defeated, because Cleopatra's story is woven into its stones, its streets, its shimmering morning light. She may have fallen, but her legend rose. She may have died, but her narrative lived. She may have lost her kingdom, but she conquered history. And as you breathe in the warm Egyptian air, carrying the faint scent of lotus and sea, you feel her presence lingering in the breeze, in the warmth, in the hush of night. Cleopatra, last pharaoh, last queen, never forgotten. The torches dim, the wind softens, and your journey settles into stillness. And now, as the final echoes of Cleopatra's world drift into silence, let your breathing slow, your shoulders soften, and your mind ease into the quiet. The tension of battles, the weight of thrones, the thunder of empires, all of it begins to dissolve, like sand slipping between your fingers. Picture the Nile at dusk, broad, calm, and glowing with the last light of day. The water moves in long, unhurried waves, each one carrying away a little more of the noise, the rush, the sharp edges of thought. You stand on the riverbank, warm breeze brushing your face, and in that gentle rhythm, you feel your heartbeat settle. The city of Alexandria fades into a distant outline, its lanterns shimmering softly, its ancient stones cooling under a violet sky. Somewhere beyond the quiet hum of night insects, you can almost hear the soft splash of oars from a far-off boat, its motion steady, soothing, hypnotic. Let your breath flow like the river. Slow in, slow out. Each exhale loosens something within you. Each inhale fills you with calm. You imagine the stars blooming above, bright, serene, timeless. Cleopatra once studied these same constellations, tracing their patterns for signs of destiny. But tonight, the stars ask nothing of you. They simply shine, soft and patient, inviting your thoughts to drift like gentle currents. Feel your body growing heavier, sinking into rest. Feel your mind quieting, settling, smoothing out like still water. And as the night deepens, let the last traces of the story fade into the background, just a warm echo now, guiding you gently towards sleep. You're safe. You're calm. You're drifting.